Chapter 769. The two celestial emperors of the demon clan were not the only ones who were shocked. The Buddhas of the West, the five emperors of the underworld, the Jia sect that had once followed Yi Xian, and the immortals of the Chan sect were all trembling in fear. Impossible! A panicked voice suddenly sounded. Zhen Yuanzi stood up with a bang and looked at the primal chaos Empyrean array with extreme shock. It's indeed impossible. How can there be a fourth heaven and earth isolation array in this world? Landyeth slowly stood up and stared at the array under Yi Xian's feet. His voice was trembling. Silence. Silence, a deathly silence. The three realms seemed to have become dead silent in an instant. Except for the two heaven and earth isolation arrays that were buzzing between heaven and earth, there was no other sound. At this moment, even the indifferent goddess Nuwa had stood up. She looked at the primal chaos Empyrean formation with an extremely complicated gaze. No one knew what she was thinking, but it was clear that her heart was not calm. Heaven and earth isolation array. Shen Gongbao's face was pale, and there was deep regret in his eyes. He looked at everyone in the celestial court in a daze, and the scenes of getting along with each other for the past 100,000 years flashed across his mind. But in the end, he could only sigh. In Shen Gongbao's heart, Yi Xian could always bring miracles, and this had never changed. Even though he left the celestial court with the immortals of the Jia sect, his respect for Yi Xian did not decrease at all. Because there had never been a person who had grown from a small Tai Xian immortal to such a level today. He could say that he had witnessed Yi Xian's journey with his own eyes, and his heart was full of admiration. Today, when the ancient demon court used the heavenly cycle star array, Yi Xian also used a heaven and earth isolation array in such a hopeless situation. This kind of shock simply made Shen Gongbao unable to be any more shocked, and even made the immortals of the Jia sect behind him look ashamed. If they had not left back then and stood firmly behind Yi Xian, the 33rd Celestial Court might not be afraid of the ancient demon court today. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world. Everything had already become a thing of the past. Even if the immortals of Jia school were regretful, they could not turn back time. Bang! Suddenly, just as everyone was immersed in a state of indescribable shock, a towering roar came from the sky, causing everyone to suddenly wake up and look towards the source of the sound. Within the massive heavenly cycle star formation, Emperor Jun's face was ferocious and terrifying. At this moment, he was laughing wildly. Deliberately mystifying and pretentious. How dare you call this formation the ultimate formation of heaven and earth? Today, I will destroy your 33 celestial court. They directly gathered the power to destroy heaven and earth, and led the entire ancient demon court to attack Yi Xian. Rumble. Billions of starlight turned into a boundless sea of stars, and the ancient demon court turned into a starlight ship. In the luminous starry sky, stars fell one after another. When the picture scroll of destruction appeared, a world-destroying war officially began. Absolute heaven. When hundreds of millions of starlight descended, Yi Xian roared ferociously. The primal chaos absolute heaven formation finally displayed its terrifying might. Rumble. The darkness was boundless, and the starlight was extinguished. Boundless ferocious aura fell from the sky. The countless stars that fell from the luminous star turned into ashes, and the 33 celestial court turned into a huge dark star that violently collided with the ancient demon court. The two absolute arrays, the two celestial court, the light of billions of stars, and the boundless ferocious aura, these two supreme and invincible forces finally collided in the crumbling heaven and earth. Bang! It was as if the chaotic heaven and earth had exploded, as if time and space had been annihilated. When the two celestial court collided, a terrifying energy that could destroy heaven and earth erupted. Rumble. The heaven and earth shattered, and billions of miles of the void were annihilated. The rippling terrifying aftershock spread towards the earth immortal realm. In the midst of the destruction, the entire Dongxing divine continent was torn into two. Bang! 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 The mountains within millions and millions of miles were turned into ashes. The boundless eastern sea was surging with huge waves. The living beings were crying, and the souls of the dead were wailing. This world-destroying energy was burying all living things. No living being could survive under this world-destroying energy. The earthly immortal realm was said to be boundless. Just the Dongxing divine continent alone was hundreds of millions of miles away. However, when the two ultimate arrays collided, the Dongxing divine continent was directly torn into two. The terrifying scene was simply unbearable. Kill. Rumble. The heaven and earth were boundless, and the universe was vast. Between the heaven and earth, the two celestial court rumbled and shone. Yi Xian stood on the absolute chaos formation, and the boundless ferocious aura covered him. He was staring fiercely and cruelly at the ancient demon court in front of him. Chapter 770. That strike just now completely proved one thing. The primal chaos absolute heaven formation wasn't any weaker than the heavenly cycle star formation. This also made Yi Xian and the heavenly court's troops 100 times more confident. As for the chaos caused by the two celestial court, Yi Xian did not feel anything at all. Even if hundreds of millions of creatures died tragically, he did not care at all. Today, he must destroy the ancient demon court in one go. That was what he wanted to do. On the ancient demon court's side, Dong Huangtai and Di Jun's faces were gloomy. Although the ancient demons behind them maintained the heavenly cycle star formation, everyone's faces were grim. They were evenly matched. It turned out that they were evenly matched. Just now, when the two formations collided, there was no winner or loser. They did not cause any damage to the 33rd Celestial Court, which made them feel extremely depressed. What should we do? The ancient demon court was in an extremely heavy mood. Now, even the last means to destroy the Celestial Court was useless. Did they really have to destroy the 33rd Celestial Court? Celestial Emperor, why don't we retreat? Fengbo looked serious and secretly transmitted his voice. However, when his words fell into the ears of the two Celestial Emperors, Fengbo was met with their sharp gazes. Celestial Emperor, it's not that the ancient demon court is afraid of Yi Xian. It's just that if we continue to fight like this, not to mention that the three realms will be devastated, the final outcome will only be a lose-lose. If the Wu tribe hits us when we're down, then the ancient demon court. Fengbo wanted to say something but stopped. However, before he could continue, Dong Huangtai and Emperor Jun's expressions changed greatly, and they instantly understood. Yes, it was just as Count of Wind had said. If the two of them led the ancient heavenly court to continue fighting the ancient heavenly court, the outcome would only be a lose-lose situation. Wouldn't that be allowing the shaman race to gain an advantage? If the ancient 12 ancestors of sorcery attacked while the ancient demon court was weak, how could they resist? Big brother. Di Jun clenched his fists tightly as he looked at the Eastern Emperor Tai Yi. What Fengbo said was very reasonable. Even though he wanted nothing more than to tear Yi Xian into 10,000 pieces, if the witch clan secretly eyed the ancient demon court covetously, wouldn't that be a calamity for the ancient demon court? Dong Huangtai laughed at himself. He seemed to have aged in an instant. He shook his head at Emperor Jun with a wry smile and pointed at Yi Xian, saying bitterly, "It's not up to us to retreat now. Look at Yi Xian, how could he let us leave?" Rumble. The darkness was boundless, and the murderous aura filled the sky. The Chaos Heaven Isolation Array was emitting a ferocious light that could shake the world. Millions of heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were roaring crazily. The Tongtian's earth-shattering killing intent was pressing down on the ancient demon court. How dare you offend the celestial court? Today, you won't be able to leave. Yi Xian stood on top of the primal chaos absolute heaven formation. Behind him, millions of heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals were waving their flags. Their heaven-shaking, earth-shattering fiendish aura surged violently as they charged towards the ancient demon court. Yi Xian, You've gone too far. Emperor Jun's face turned red, and his voice exploded in the void. As he had seen, even if they retreated now, Yi Xian had no intention of stopping. Today, the battle had reached this point, and there was only one celestial court left in the world. Kill. Dong Huangtai's expression was cold and stern. Since there was no way to retreat, then he might as well go all out. Today, he had to fight to the death with Yi Xian. As for the threat of the witch clan, he could only temporarily suppress it. Bang! The ultimate formation of heaven and earth collided with a loud bang, causing the heavens and the earth to explode. The fire of the earth's core soared into the sky, and the water of the East Sea surged into the sky. The luminous star fell from the sky, bringing with it a fiery light that pierced through the heaven and earth, and smashed into the land of the Dongxing Divine Prefecture. Heaven and Earth Isolation Array. Yi Xian roared furiously in the sky. The three quasi-saints howled miserably, and millions of heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals roared at the heavens and earth. The primal chaos absolute heaven formation became even more terrifying, wanting to completely annihilate the entire ancient demon court. Starlight Fall. The two demon emperors were not easy to deal with. They led thousands of ancient demons to meet the attack. The cosmic star formation gathered the power of billions of stars and violently clashed with the Chaos Heaven Isolation Array. Rumble. The two celestial court were so vast that they had already covered the boundless sky. At this moment, under the support of the two heaven and earth isolation arrays, the destruction caused was unimaginable. Bang, bang, bang. Billions of stars, ferocious chi, and the laws of heaven and earth went berserk and then disappeared without a trace. The two celestial court were like chaotic divine mountains clashing madly. The heaven and earth isolation array destroyed heaven and earth. Both sides were in a frenzy. The thousands of ancient demons spat out blood, and their bodies cracked like spider webs. The celestial court troops were not in a good state either. Their bodies had already collapsed, and the immortal demon light around them was extremely dim. The heaven and earth isolation array was indeed terrifying, but it was also controlled by humans. Every clash would cause great damage to them. Now, they could only see who could last until the end to be the final victor. Kill. The two celestial emperors were completely deranged. They could feel the spirits of the ancient demons wilting. If this continued, the cosmic star formation would definitely shatter. Let's end this quickly. Dong Huangtai roared crazily. He waved the broken bell of chaos and danced in the sky, and poured his cultivation into the cosmic star formation without any regard for his life. Let's destroy the ancient demon court in one go. Yi Xian roared coldly. The thousands of ancient demons were severely injured, but the celestial court troops behind him were not faring much better. This also made Yi Xian want to end this quickly. Yi Xian, you little brat, die. You two bastards, the ones who will die, are you. Thunder roared and killing intent filled the sky. Both sides were in a frenzy. At this moment, it was either you die or I live. There was no longer any scruples. Bang, bang, bang. The destructive battle between heaven and earth entered a white-hot stage. The two celestial court troops were like chaotic beasts fighting fiercely. They bombarded each other from the sky to the ground, and from the ground to the sky. Rumble. Earth Immortal Realm, Dongxing Divine Continent, Ancient Heaven City. The ancient Heaven City spanned hundreds of millions of miles. It was an extremely famous orthodoxy in the Dongxing Divine Continent. There were hundreds of millions of mortals and countless immortal cultivators living in it. But at this moment, hundreds of millions of mortals were kneeling on the ground, kowtowing and praying to the heavens. This was because heaven and earth were rumbling and shaking. Large numbers of buildings were collapsing, and all sorts of cries could be heard. Boom! Just as countless mortals were scrambling to escape and wailing in grief, the two boundless celestial court descended. Just as they collided in the void, the destructive aftershocks that poured down instantly turned the ancient heaven city into ashes. Countless mortals were crushed into a bloody mist and disappeared on the ground. Rumble. Hundreds of millions of miles of land sank thousands of feet. Terrifying ravines crisscrossed the scorched earth. Fiery lava spewed out from the earth's core, drowning the once bustling ancient heaven city. Chapter 771. Destroy the heavens, destroy the earth, and destroy all living things. These simple words described the scene in front of them. However, the two celestial courts were already fighting to the death. They had no pity for the deaths of billions of mortals and disappeared into the void in an instant. Bang, bang, bang. The vast and boundless earth immortal realm was suffering a calamity of the world. Because the two heavenly courts were constantly moving, it was as if they were chasing each other. The billions of rays of starlight and boundless baleful aura that shot out were ceaselessly burying all living beings in the world. Human cities were annihilated one after another. The vast mountains were collapsing, and the magma in the earth's core was surging. This was a world of blood and life. No living things could survive. Not only were the mortals suffering from this catastrophe, but the demons in the endless mountains were also crying and fleeing. However, the two celestial courts covered the sky and covered the earth. The battle between the two ultimate formations of heaven and earth was just the aftershocks that were released were enough to take the lives of all living things. Mountains and rivers were destroyed, the earth was sinking, and the void was collapsing. The cracks in space were like curtains that covered the sky. They were tearing everything in the surroundings apart and were slowly healing under the laws of heaven and earth. From the ground to the sky, and from the sky to the ground, the Dongxing divine continent suffered unimaginable destruction. More than half of the land was turned into endless scorched earth. Above the East Sea, the blue waves were overturning the sky. The two celestial courts whizzed past. The terrifying power that was released vaporized the seawater into smoke. More than half of the East Sea was dissipated. The shrimp soldiers and crab generals in the East Sea were all killed. The sky full of blood dyed the East Sea red and completely turned it into a dead zone. However, this catastrophe was not over. This was just the beginning. The two celestial courts were fighting to the extreme. Even the buildings in the celestial courts were being destroyed and collapsed. The battle had reached a white-hot stage. Kill. It shook the heavens and cracked the earth. Ashes flew and were annihilated. More than half of the Dongxing divine continent was penetrated. However, the battle between the two celestial courts was not over. They were bombarding each other in the boundless heavens and earth. The terrifying power that could destroy mountains and rivers was unleashed. Everywhere the two celestial courts passed by, everything was destroyed. In the Aparagodania continent, everyone worshipped Buddha. But today, the Aparagodania continent was in complete darkness. Even the spirit mountain in the west, which had been shining for eternity, was dimmed. Countless bodhisattvas and arhats were scrambling to flee to the outside world. Oh my God, what happened? Bodhisattva, please show mercy and save us. Buddha above, please have mercy on us mortals and save us from the abyss of suffering. Countless mortals were wailing in grief, and demons were fleeing for their lives. However, when the two celestial courts swept across the boundless void, the starlight and baleful auras that were unleashed by each other instantly filled the Buddhist lands with smoke and dust. It was unknown how many living beings had died tragically. Puff. Puff. Be it bodhisattvas, Buddhas, or even some famous great monster kings, they all died in the void, exploding into mists of blood that filled the sky and drifted between heaven and earth. Even when they were dying, they didn't even have time to scream. It was too frightening to imagine. The earth-shattering battle between the two celestial courts could be said to have destroyed mountains and rivers. Not only were innocent mortals buried in it, but even immortals, Buddhas, and demons could not escape this catastrophe. What was a catastrophe of heaven and earth? It pierced through heaven and earth, annihilated all living beings, stirred up the ancient and modern world, and killed billions of living beings. This was the so-called catastrophe of heaven and earth. However, this catastrophe was just the beginning. The terror of the two great arrays of heaven and earth had just been revealed. Half of the Aparagodania continent had been reduced to ashes, and countless living beings had died tragically. All living things were trembling. Those who were lucky enough to survive were praying to the heavens. The world was filled with cries, and the billions of souls of the dead were wailing. They were all sucked into the netherworld by the light of guidance. The underworld. The 6 paths of reincarnation were in chaos. Countless dead souls were crying. The vast underworld was in extreme turmoil. Even the 6 paths of reincarnation that had been immovable since ancient times was trembling. The 18 levels of hell. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's expression changed drastically. He chanted the merciful Buddha's name and displayed the supreme power of Buddhism to suppress the riot. However, the fierce aura of resentment and unwillingness of the dead souls instantly shattered the Buddha's light around him. Mouthfuls of golden Buddha blood kept spurting out from his mouth, and his entire body fell to the ground. The catastrophe of heaven and earth, and all living beings were destroyed. How could these countless dead souls not hate? How could Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva suppress the power of anger and resentment produced after their deaths? 6 paths of reincarnation, cycle of life and death. Suddenly, a dark figure walked out from the depths of the underworld. His body was blooming with the light of the 6 paths of reincarnation, giving people a feeling of the void of heaven and earth. Rumble. The 6 paths of reincarnation were shining. Wisps of 6 paths of suppression swept through the vast underworld, gradually calming down the endless dead souls. However, a mouthful of blood also spurted out from the mysterious figure's mouth. Obviously, he had suffered an unimaginable injury in order to calm the anger and resentment of hundreds of millions of dead souls. Mengpa, are you still not going to make a move? Do you want to watch the 6 paths of reincarnation collapse? The person roared coldly. His vast and boundless voice resounded throughout the underworld. There is no road to the Yellow Springs. The dead may rest in peace. On the bridge of helplessness, there was a stooped old woman. Her face was haggard and her eyes were hollow. Her withered hand was scooping up a bowl of turbid soup and sprinkling it directly into the void. Woo woo woo. The 9 nether draft shook the souls of people. A terrifying wind blew in the dark and boundless underworld. The river of forgetfulness flowed in reverse, and the water of the Yellow Springs overturned the sky. It directly turned into a curtain of water that covered the sky and earth. It instantly appeared everywhere in the underworld, engulfing the endless dead souls. The catastrophe of heaven and earth, so be it. Mengpa sighed hoarsely. She was completely silent. Sigh. In front of the 6 paths of reincarnation, the black figure let out a long sigh. He flicked his sleeves and disappeared. Only a sorrowful sigh was left, proving his extremely heavy mood. The Earth God Realm. The Aparagodania continent was devastated. The 2 celestial courts had already left. However, the once Buddhist land was no longer full of vitality. There were only cries and sorrowful howls that reverberated between heaven and earth. The Nanjan Department continent, the North continent. These 2 large continents had also suffered from the catastrophe of heaven and earth. Countless living beings had died tragically. Even though the Earth God realm was vast and boundless, the impact of the battle between the 2 celestial courts was too great. If this continued, perhaps more than half of the 3 realms would be destroyed. Rumble. Billions of stars were dim and without light. The ferocious aura was faintly discernible. The 2 celestial courts had unknowingly returned to the firmament and were facing each other across space. Puff. Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as a sheet of gold paper. Even the heaven-destroying halberd that he was holding was trembling. This proved how much damage he had suffered from activating the Chaos Empyrean formation. Not only Yi Xian, but the bodies of the 3 demi-saints were stained with blood. The light around them was extremely dim. Behind Yi Xian and the rest, more than half of the celestial court had died. They had all died of exhaustion. Their withered corpses lay on the Chaos Empyrean formation. It was a ghastly sight. Mountains of corpses, seas of blood, piles of white bones. These 8 words described the tragic state of the celestial court. However, the ancient demon court did not have it easy either. The bodies of the 2 celestial emperors had collapsed. Their bodies were drenched in blood. The demonic light around them was extremely dim. Blood kept flowing out of their mouths. More than half of the ancient demon court had collapsed to the ground. Most of them had died of exhaustion. Countless demons had turned into a pool of blood and soaked the entire ancient demon court. Both sides had suffered great losses. This was the outcome of the 2 celestial courts. However, this earth-shattering battle was not over. At this moment, Yi Xian and the 2 celestial emperors were staring at each other. Both of their eyes were overflowing with murderous intent. Chapter 772. The blood of the 2 celestial court dyed the sky red. The destruction caused by the battle spread far and wide. Both sides had suffered heavy casualties and were now extremely weak. "Brother, let's fight!" Di Jun roared ferociously. His eyes were bloodshot. Now that both sides were injured, the ancient demon court would become a joke if Yi Xian continued to live. "I'm afraid you can't afford to fight." Yi Xian roared angrily. His eyes were overflowing with murderous intent. The heaven-destroying halberd buzzed in his hand and the chaotic sky-terminating formation released a destructive aura once again. "Yi Xian, you forced me to do this." Dong Huangtai's eyes were as red as blood. His expression was ferocious and twisted. Madness flashed across his eyes as if he had made a huge decision. Rumble. Above the sky, in the void, the ancient demon court shook violently under Dong Huangtai's feet. The heavenly cycle star formation was vast and boundless. At this moment, billions of starlight shone down and enveloped the entire ancient demon court. Sutras were being chanted in the void. The ancient demon court, which had fallen to the ground, slowly got up. Everyone's face was solemn and they were chanting mysterious and profound sutras. "Gather billions of starlight." Di Jun took a step forward and roared into the sky. "Summon the heavenly cycle star formation." Dong Huangtai's hands formed seals as he roared at the heavens and earth. It was obvious that at the last moment, they were going to use their killing moves to annihilate Yi Xian and the 33 heavenly courts in one fell swoop. Buzz! The heavenly cycle star formation buzzed and rotated. The luminous starry sky instantly dimmed. The large stars were even dimmer. However, at this moment, unimaginable starlight shone down. Rumble. Endless starlight shone down. Not only did it illuminate the ancient demon court, but it also suppressed the laws of heaven and earth. The grand chanting of the demon court rumbled. On the other side, Yi Xian stood on the chaotic sky terminating formation. His expression changed instantly because a sense of danger suddenly appeared in his heart. Yi Xian knew that the ancient demon court was about to go all out. This would also determine who the winner of the 2 celestial courts would be. Heavenly Emperor. All of a sudden, the Kun Peng's eyes turned gloomy as he roared, "They are going to activate the Starlight Annihilation, which is also the strongest move of the cosmic star formation. If we can't withstand it, we will definitely be annihilated." Strongest killing move. Yi Xian muttered to himself. His aura was extremely obscure. At this moment of life and death, everyone in the celestial court focused their attention on him. Clearly, whether or not he could withstand the final attack of the ancient demon court would be the key to victory or defeat. This would also determine who was the true ruler of the world. "Brother Bai Yi, I need your help." Yi Xian abruptly raised his head and gazed at his surroundings. he even began to mutter to himself. This also stunned the three quasi-saints. They did not know who Yi Xian was talking to. Buzz! Ripples appeared in the void as the inverse immortal formation floated out and circled around Yi Xian. The wisps of starlight were gentle and peaceful, but they made one's heart feel heavy. Yi Xian stared at the inverse immortal formation in a daze. His eyes were a little dazed. It was as if he saw Lu Bai walking out of the inverse immortal formation. His robes were whiter than snow and untainted by even a speck of dust. He was like a wisp of fireworks that shone brightly in the world. However, he passed by in a hurry, unnoticed by the world. Brother Bai Yi. Brother Yi. Lu Bai smiled at Yi Xian. It was unknown whether Yi Xian was hallucinating or if Lu Bai's heroic spirit was truly indestructible. At this final moment, he met Yi Xian. What should I do? Yi Xian whispered. Life and death vanish, all souls return to dust. Although this move was only conceived by you and me, it is the strongest killing move of the chaotic heaven vanquishing formation, Lu Bai whispered with a smile. I understand now. Yi Xian's heavy expression disappeared. A trace of a smile appeared on his face, and his entire body calmed down. However, the primal chaos absolute heaven formation was shining brightly beneath his feet. Heaven Emperor, who are you talking to? The Kuan Peng was extremely bewildered because they saw Yi Xian muttering to himself. It was as if there was someone in front of him. How could they not be bewildered at such a critical moment? Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not answer Kuan Peng's question. He just took a deep breath and suddenly turned to look at the ancient demon court. A voice that could destroy mountains and rivers came out of his mouth. Whiter than snow, chaotic heaven vanquishing formation. The chaotic heaven vanquishing formation was created by my close friend Lu Bai. It is no weaker than the cosmic stars formation. Today, let me, Yi Xian, see if the ancient demon court can withstand my last move. Yi Xian, go to hell. Emperor Jun roared and the ancient demon court exploded. Heaven and earth were collapsing and everything was dying. The chanting of the ancient demon court became more and more terrifying. Starlight destruction. Dong Huang Tai's roar shattered heaven and earth. The two heaven emperors worked together and the ancient demon general poured what little cultivation he had left into the cosmic stars formation. Rumble. Starlight filled the sky and suppressed the heaven and earth. The ancient demon court seemed to have turned into a star that was billions of miles long. It destroyed the world completely with starlight that could destroy both heaven and earth. It also came crashing down on the 33rd celestial court. Life and death vanish, all souls return to ruins. Yi Xian let out an earth-shattering roar as he stabbed the halberd in his hand into the eye of the formation beneath his feet. The three quasi-saints and the heavenly court troops behind him were also crazily pouring their cultivation into the primal chaos absolute heaven formation. Bang, bang, bang. Life and death vanish, the 8 gates opened. The chaotic heaven vanquishing formation was completely out of control. A terrifying black hole that was billions of miles long appeared in the sky. Endless evil chi came crashing down. Kill. The chaotic heaven vanquishing formation was like an ancient star. It was even more like a ferocious beast in the chaos. It rushed toward the ancient demon court amidst the earth-shaking battle cries of the celestial court. Go to hell. You're the ones who will die. Bang! The heaven and earth cracked and the sun and moon lost their light. When the two celestial courts' strongest killing moves collided, the 3 realms suddenly darkened and no sound could be heard. There was no earth-shattering, no destruction of mountains and rivers. There was only endless darkness. It was as if heaven and earth had turned into nothingness at this moment. Everything returned to its original point and nothing would exist anymore. At this moment, whether it was the 8 forces or the sages to be, their primordial spirits were all stagnant. It was as if time and space had stopped moving. Even their thoughts had been frozen. Crack. It was like the first sound of the chaos. It was as if heaven and earth had just opened. A soft cracking sound could be heard between heaven and earth. It was not loud, but it clearly reached the ears of all living beings in the three realms and allowed their thoughts to gradually return to normal. Suddenly, a gust of wind whistled between heaven and earth and gradually blew away the endless darkness. A blinding light bloomed in the sky. However, the scene that happened in the next moment caused the souls of all living beings in the three realms to shatter. Their bodies and minds trembled to the extreme and they were completely stunned. Chapter 773. In the sky, the two celestial courts were on the verge of collapsing. The floating islands and pavilions in the celestial court had turned into debris, and the two ultimate arrays of heaven and earth had long vanished. The ancient demon court was shattered, and its original appearance could no longer be seen. The two celestial emperors were covered in blood, and their crowns had fallen to the ground. At this moment, they were half kneeling on the ground, and blood was constantly spurting out of their mouths. Behind Dong Huangtai and Emperor Jun, more than half of the ancient demons were either dead or injured. Their bodies were completely shattered, leaving only 3,000 of them alive. The dozens of demi-saints of the demon race were unconscious, their auras dim and lifeless. On the other side, in the 33rd celestial court, Yi Xian's body was cracked like a spider web, and a large amount of blood was flowing out of his body. His face was extremely pale, and it was obvious that he had also suffered a great disaster. Among the three sage-to-be, Kong Xian was unconscious, Taishang Laojun was sitting cross-legged, and half of Kunpeng's body had exploded. It was unknown whether he was alive or dead. Millions of celestial soldiers and celestial generals were all dead, and even more than half of the thousands of Daluo Jingxian were dead. Only a few thousand people survived, and their miserable state was unbearable to look at. This was the final outcome of the battle between the two heavenly courts. However, this wasn't something that terrified the living beings of the three realms. What truly terrified the living beings of the three realms was what they were witnessing right now. The boundless sky was gradually cracking. A crack spread in the sky, and gradually broke open with a loud rumble. The crack was expanding faster and faster, and it only stopped when it had completely torn open the sky for hundreds of millions of miles. However, it was also at this moment that something extremely terrifying happened. The luminous starry sky was shaking, and meteorites fell from the starry sky, directly through the terrifying crack, and fell toward the Earth immortal world. However, this was not the end. The boundless sea of stars in the luminous starry sky was surging, and the vast sea of stars poured down in torrents, turning into a long river of stars that poured down in reverse. The terrifying scene was simply too horrible to look at. The sky was broken open. The laws of heaven and earth disappeared, and the sky could not be healed. When the two celestial court used their strongest killing moves, the result was that the sky was pierced. Even the laws of heaven and earth could not repair the whole. In the untainted land, there was an untainted ancient mountain named Buzhou. The divine mountain of Buzhou supported the heaven and earth. However, the divine mountain of Buzhou was knocked down by the two ancient ancestors of sorcery, Zhurong and Gonggong. Because of the collapse of the divine mountain of Buzhou, a heavenly hole was opened in the firmament, bringing a devastating disaster to the untainted land. As for Nuwa, she had obtained the five-colored divine stone from the ancient demon court. Only then did she complete the heaven-mending merit, preventing all living beings in the world from suffering. This was also the foundation of her merit sage ascension. However, today, the two celestial courts were engaged in a destructive battle. This battle was definitely 100 times more terrifying than the battle between the two ancestors of sorcery. It also tore the sky apart for hundreds of millions of miles. The terrible consequences of this battle were incomparable to those of the past. Rumble. Meteorites fell from the sky of Taihao Star, and the vast sea of stars poured down. The boundless earth immortal realm suffered an unimaginable calamity. It's over, it's over. Duo Bao Rulai sat on the ground, paralyzed. His voice became extremely sharp. The Immortal of the South Pole's face was extremely pale, and his legs were trembling. Even the sage-to-be's faces were extremely ugly, and there was a look of horror in their eyes. The sky was broken. If this calamity could not be stopped, the heaven, earth, and man realms would not be far from destruction. Eastern Emperor Tai. Suddenly, just as the living beings of the three realms were in despair, an explosive sound came from all directions. In the 33 celestial courts, Yi Xian held the heaven-destroying halberd and walked in the sky. He was heading towards the ancient demon court. Whether the sky collapsed or the earth sank, Yi Xian did not feel anything even if all the living beings in the world died. At this moment, his eyes were blood red, and a fierce aura surged into the sky. He only wanted to destroy the ancient demon court. At this moment, he had no other thoughts. Stepping in the sky, the heaven-destroying halberd fell towards the ancient demon court. After an earth-shattering explosion, the heaven-destroying halberd stabbed into the ground in front of the two demonic emperors. It was emitting an extremely fierce light. Bang! Yi Xian stomped on the ground and looked at the two celestial emperors with a sinister look in his eyes. The smile on his face was extremely sinister and terrifying. Although Yi Xian had suffered an unimaginable injury by activating the heavenly chaos formation, one should not forget that his body was extremely terrifying. At this moment, his cracked body was slowly healing. Although he could not recover to his peak strength, it was more than enough to kill the two celestial emperors of the demon race. How do you want to die? Bang! Yi Xian was sinister and ferocious. He took a step forward and suddenly appeared in front of the two celestial emperors. His two hands suddenly grabbed the necks of the two celestial emperors, and directly lifted Dong Huangtai and Di Jun into the air. Cough, cough, cough. Dong Huangtai and Di Jun's bodies were cracked and their cultivations were depleted. How could they be a match for Yi Xian? Now that they were in Yi Xian's hands, they were furious and blood kept flowing out of their mouths. Celestial Emperors. Such a scene made thousands of great demons roar in grief. The dozens of sage-to-be prostrated on the ground and glared at Yi Xian. However, they could not even protect themselves at this moment. How could they save the two celestial emperors? Yi Xian, you brat! Di Jun's face turned purple and terrifying as his neck was tightly gripped by Yi Xian. He was screaming crazily and looked at Yi Xian with indescribable hatred. Crack! The sound of bones cracking came from Di Jun's neck. Yi Xian's hand was exerting a terrifying force, causing Di Jun's neck to twist irregularly. Ah! Di Jun groaned as he was severely injured. However, he stared at Yi Xian viciously and did not beg for mercy. Beg me. Beg me quickly. If you beg me, I may give you a quick death. Yi Xian tightly gripped Di Jun's neck, as if Di Jun had become a toy in his hands and was being ravaged by him to his heart's content. An extremely vicious and cruel smile appeared on his face. Yi Xian, you trash. If you want to kill me, just do it. You must be daydreaming to make me beg you. Blood continuously flowed out of Di Jun's mouth. His neck had already caved in. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a quasi-saint and had only suffered Yi Xian's cruel ravages, he would have already been twisted by Yi Xian and died. Bang! Di Jun's cursing stopped abruptly because Yi Xian was laughing cruelly and viciously. Di Jun suddenly fell on the hard ground. Before Di Jun could recover, Yi Xian's broad foot stomped on his face. Beg me, beg me, beg me quickly. Bang, bang, bang. An extremely terrifying and humiliating scene appeared. Yi Xian gripped Dong Huangtai with one hand and stomped on Di Jun's face. Every time his foot landed, Di Jun's face would collapse and his 7 apertures would bleed profusely. Chapter 774. Will you beg me? Will you beg me? Bang! 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 Yi Xian's face was ferocious and cruel, and his eyes were unimaginably sinister. He seemed to have fallen into a state of madness and was using all his strength to humiliate Di Jun. His broad feet directly trampled half of Di Jun's head into the ground. Everything was silent, and even the sky was silent. Such a fantastical scene appeared in the ancient demon court, causing everyone to be dumbfounded. The two great demon emperors had actually fallen to such a state. How could they dare to believe this? Yi Xian, kill me if you want. Even if you humiliate us, we will never beg you for mercy. Dong Huangtai's eyes were filled with despair, but he would not beg Yi Xian even before he died. This was his last dignity as a heavenly emperor of the demon clan. Humiliate you? Yi Xian fiercely stomped on Di Jun's face. His wide feet continued to grind, causing the teeth in Di Jun's mouth to fall out one after another. At this moment, he couldn't even say a word. However, his blood-red eyes were already filled with extreme humiliation. Slap! Suddenly, a loud slap was heard. Yi Xian had stepped on Di Jun's face and slapped Dong Huangtai's face. Dong Huangtai was stunned on the spot, but half of his face was already swollen. So what if I humiliate you too? Slap! Another resounding slap landed on Dong Huangtai's face. The crisp sound was extremely pleasing to the ears, but when the scene fell into the eyes of everyone present, their bodies and minds trembled. Stepping on Di Jun and holding Dong Huangtai's hand. When such a scene appeared, it was simply unbelievable, and they did not dare to believe it. Who were Dong Huangtai and Di Jun? They were the two heavenly emperors of the ancient demon court. Even if they were not the two heavenly emperors, they were peerless figures among the sage-to-be. But today, they suffered a disaster. Not only were they going to lose their lives here, but they were also going to suffer unimaginable humiliation before they died. This was simply a great humiliation to them. Yi Xian, you'll die a horrible death. Dong Huangtai finally regained his senses. However, his face was already swollen and bruised. His original appearance could no longer be seen. At this moment, he was letting out an extremely humiliated roar. Ha! Yi Xian laughed wildly as he looked at Dong Huangtai's extremely humiliated gaze. It was as if he couldn't breathe from laughing. Only after a few breaths of time did Yi Xian's laughter gradually stop. I don't know if I'll die a horrible death, but today, you two pieces of trash will die in my hands. Yi Xian's words were malevolent and sinister. His eyes bloomed with unimaginable killing intent, and the evil aura around him rumbled and seethed. It was no wonder that Yi Xian was like this. Today's battle had directly shattered the 33rd Heaven Celestial Court. The team he had built up over 100,000 years had been completely destroyed. If he did not humiliate the two heavenly emperors, how could he resolve the hatred in his heart? Of course, the so-called humiliation was just an appetizer. Today, Yi Xian would also destroy the two heavenly emperors. That was what he wanted to do. Bang! Yi Xian threw Dong Huangtai to the ground like he was throwing garbage, and even kicked him to the ground. His barbaric behavior was shocking. Kneel! Yi Xian smiled cruelly and viciously. His hands suddenly grabbed the two heavenly emperors' hair and directly lifted them from the ground. With two ear-piercing sounds of bones breaking, the two heavenly emperors fell to their knees at Yi Xian's feet. Buzz! The void trembled and evil aura surged. The heaven-destroying halberd, which had been inserted diagonally into the ground, rose from the ground and landed in Yi Xian's hands. As Yi Xian swung the halberd, the cold halberd light filled the air. The number one killing weapon of all time also pressed down on the shoulders of the two heavenly emperors, as if it would kill them on the spot in the next moment. Silence, silence, a deathly silence. When this scene appeared, whether it was the ancient demon court, the 33rd Heaven Celestial Court, or even the various sage-to-be and major forces, at this moment, there was a deathly silence. This was because from the beginning to the end, no one could have imagined that the final victor of the battle between the two celestial court would be Yi Xian, and that the two heavenly emperors of the ancient demon court would ultimately kneel at Yi Xian's feet. Waiting for their arrival was the arrival of death. Heaven and earth are limitless, and all laws are unique. There will only be one heavenly emperor in the three realms of heaven, earth, and man, and this person is Yi Xian. The two of you are just my stepping stones. From now on, the title of Heavenly Emperor in the world will be mine alone. Yi Xian stood with his halberd, his voice vast and majestic, reverberating throughout the three realms, causing people to tremble both physically and mentally. The majesty of the Heavenly Emperor made the living beings of the three realms feel a sense of worship. Yi Xian, I have to say that the two of us have indeed been defeated, and thoroughly defeated. We do not need the title of Heavenly Emperor. Dong Huangtai did not look angry, and his voice had become extremely calm. However, there was a hint of pity in his eyes when he looked at Yi Xian. Unfortunately, you can't kill the two of us. In the end, you will only die. Dong Huangtai suddenly smiled, and his expression became extremely serious. Can't kill the two of you? Yi Xian narrowed his eyes, and the heaven-destroying halberd was slowly raised. A ray of fierce divine light bloomed on the halberd, and at that moment, it suddenly slashed towards the two of them. Enough! Ding! Heaven and earth froze, and space froze. A calm voice reverberated between heaven and earth. The holy light pressed down on the ancient demon court, preventing Yi Xian's heaven-destroying halberd from descending. How is it? I said that you can't kill the two of us. Dong Huangtai said calmly, but his gaze was looking behind Yi Xian. At that moment, Yi Xian's face was gloomy, and his body was slightly stiff. Although he did not turn around, he knew who had appeared behind him. Queen Nuwa, what are you doing? Yi Xian slowly turned around, and his gaze was gloomy and cold. A slender figure was reflected in his eyes, and the person behind him was the high and mighty Saint Nuwa. Yi Xian, since you have already won, why do you have to kill them all? Queen Nuwa's body was covered in holy light, and her posture was dignified and elegant. She gave off a dignified and inviolable feeling. At that moment, she was speaking calmly to Yi Xian, and there was not a single ripple in her voice. Below the saint, everyone was an ant. The saint was high and mighty, and there was no difference in the eyes of the saint. Whether it was a sage-to-be, a celestial emperor, or a mortal, there was not much difference in the eyes of the saint, because the saint was the highest in heaven and earth, and no one dared to go against the saint's will. What if I have to kill them all? Yi Xian's voice gradually turned cold, and his eyes met with Nuwa's. This caused the atmosphere to instantly become strange, and an extremely oppressive atmosphere suddenly grew. The saint's will cannot be defied. If you dare to kill the two of them, it will be disrespectful to me, and I will have no choice but to kill you here. Nuwa seemed to be talking about a very casual matter, but when she finished speaking, a wisp of saints might spread out in all directions, and even the stars in the sky were extinguished. Chapter 775. When a sage was angry, the world would be turned upside down. This was not just a saying, it was an eternal truth. When Nuwa revealed the inviolable majesty of a sage, the heavens, the earth, and the starry sky suddenly froze. The silence was frightening. Everyone was speechless, but they all looked at Yi Xian with pity. Nuwa's will was inviolable, and the two demon emperors would not die today. During the Great God Investiture Tribulation, Tao Ancestor Hengjun issued a decree that sages were not allowed to fight. Do you want to go against Tao Ancestor Hengjun's decree? Yi Xian stood with his halberd. His face was as gloomy as water. His attitude was neither arrogant nor servile, but his voice was extremely cold. If the person standing in front of him was not a real sage, he would not have lowered himself to talk to him. He would have killed him with his halberd. Unfortunately, Yi Xian understood very well. He was also very calm. At this moment, he was facing a real sage, a supreme existence in the world. Not to mention that he was now seriously injured. Even if he was in his peak condition, even if he had the Chaos Empyrean formation, he would not be a match for Nuwa. Endure, he could only endure. If he could not endure and allowed Nuwa to find a reason to kill him, he would definitely suffer a life and death calamity today. Eastern Emperor Tai and Emperor Jun helped me attain Tao. I must repay this favor. Even if I go against Tao ancestor Hongjuan's decree, I must save their lives. Nuwa spoke calmly without any anger. Just as she said, the favor of attaining Tao was great. If it was not for the help of the two demon emperors in the past, she would not have been able to become a sage through merit. This was the so-called cycle of karma. If she did not save the two of them today, a flaw would appear in her sage heart. Moreover, this was not the most important problem. The most important problem was that Nuwa was already involved in this war. If Yi Xian was allowed to continue growing, until Yi Xian became the seventh sage, Yi Xian would definitely find him to settle today's karma. The karma of a sage was too terrifying. This was definitely not the result that Nuwa wanted to see. Therefore, saving the two demon emperors was secondary. At this moment, Nuwa seemed calm, but she was weighing a matter in her heart. This matter was related to Yi Xian's life and death. Since Nuwa has spoken, how can Yi Xian disobey? Yi Xian gradually calmed down. He would definitely not give Nuwa a chance to kill him. This was because Yi Xian's undying true spirit was trembling, reminding him that Nuwa wanted to kill him. Yi Xian's intuition was too terrifying. Nuwa seemed calm and quiet, but Yi Xian could feel the faint killing intent from her. He was extremely sure that if he dared to refuse, he would die in Nuwa's hands in the next moment. Yi Xian really wanted to kill Dong Huangtai and Di Jun. However, he could not do so now. Killing the two of them was not a big deal. If he gave Nuwa a chance to kill him, he would be doomed eternally. It was not that Yi Xian did not want to resist, nor was it that Yi Xian chose to compromise. It was because he was powerless to resist Nuwa. He did not even have the slightest chance of winning. It was not that there was no one in this world who could keep Goddess Nviwa in check. The other 5 sages were all more powerful than Goddess Nviwa, but they were also fellow disciples. Moreover, from the early years of the untainted land to the present world, Goddess Nviwa had never participated in the fight between the sages. Among the 6 sages, she had the most harmonious relationship. How could the other 5 sages offend her? Besides the 5 sages, Yi Xian thought of another person. Someone who had once saved his life and was suspected to be his future self. Even Nuwa was extremely wary of this person back then. This person was so powerful that even sages were afraid of him. However, Yi Xian did not dare to take the risk. This was because the person who was suspected to be his future self had said that he had only returned to the past to make up for his regrets. He did not really live in this time and space. It seemed that the person had some kind of fear. He was lonely and bleak, with a sad aura around him. He had also told Yi Xian that he was the one who lived in this world. If he wanted to change the future, only Yi Xian could do it. Traveling through time and space was the most mysterious and unpredictable. Reversing the river of time was definitely not that easy. Yi Xian understood this very well. If the person who was suspected to be his future self was so powerful, he could have killed Nuwa in Nuwa Palace in the past and wiped out all his enemies. There would not be so many things happening today. Obviously, that person could not do as he pleased. He must have paid a huge price for reversing the river of time. If Yi Xian really hoped that his future self would appear, this was definitely not the result that Yi Xian wanted. He could not afford to gamble. He could not afford to gamble at all. Yi Xian could not use his own life as a wager. This was a method that left his life in the hands of others. Whether it was retreating or being a coward, Yi Xian could only choose to endure. Because if he endured this today, when he became a sage in the future, he would definitely cut Nuwa into pieces to avenge today's humiliation. Wang! The heaven-destroying halberd moved away from the two demonic emperors. Yi Xian looked at the two demonic emperors deeply. Under the two demonic emperors' cold gazes, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and returned to the 33rd Celestial Court. Wait! Suddenly, without waiting for Yi Xian to take 3 steps, Nuwa's cold voice sounded again. This also made Yi Xian squint his eyes slightly and stop in his tracks. However, he did not turn around. May I know what Nuwa wants? Yi Xian said in a low voice. However, his eyes were bloodshot. It was obvious that he was suppressing the anger in his heart. Is the 7th Hongmeng immortal vapor in your hands? Nuwa's voice was cold. Although she seemed to be asking Yi Xian a question, she gave off a feeling of superiority. Hiss! Everyone gasped. Everyone's eyes were focused on Yi Xian. The various quasi-sages looked at Yi Xian with burning eyes. This was because this was a sage asking a question. If Yi Xian dared to lie, the sage's senses would definitely detect it. Hongmeng immortal vapor was a matter of great importance. It was also related to the birth of the 7th heaven-destined sage. How could it not attract the attention of everyone? So what if it's here? So what if it's not? Even a clay figurine would have a temper, let alone an extremely ferocious person like Yi Xian. Yi Xian slowly turned to look at Nuwa. His eyes were extremely gloomy and there was even a trace of understanding in his eyes. Nuwa wanted to attack him. This simple sentence explained the current situation. Yi Xian would definitely not be wrong. Although he had spared the lives of the 2 demon emperors, Nuwa still wanted a yard after taking an inch and was using this as an excuse to make things difficult for him. If the Hongmeng immortal vapor is in your hands, then give it to me. If it's not, then pretend that I didn't say anything, Nuwa said sternly. It's not here. Yi Xian's expression was extremely cold. However, he could only suppress his anger and give Nuwa an answer that was neither true nor false. At this moment, the Hongmeng immortal vapor was indeed not in Yi Xian's hands. This was because the Nether River Patriarch had retreated from the battle and had already returned to the Nether Blood Sea with the Hongmeng immortal vapor. Yi Xian was also not lying. Chapter 776. A saint's senses were extremely sensitive, but Yi Xian was indeed telling the truth. Nuwa could naturally sense that Yi Xian was not lying. Alright, I believe you. Nuwa nodded slowly. No one could lie in front of a saint, so she chose to believe Yi Xian. Farewell. The anger in Yi Xian's heart had already reached its limit, and he felt extremely humiliated. However, he endured it and did not flare up, because he would not give Nuwa a chance to attack him. Yi Xian held his halberd and was about to leave again, but this time, before he could take a step, a beam of holy light quietly blocked his path. This also made Yi Xian clench his fists tightly, the veins on his forehead squirming like earthworms. May I know if Goddess Nuwa has anything else to say? Yi Xian turned around again, but this time, his eyes were even more gloomy. A ferocious look appeared in his eyes, and he raised the heaven-destroying halberd in his hand slightly. Looking at Yi Xian's gradually unfriendly expression, the holy light around Nuwa paused slightly, and a hint of fear flashed across her eyes. She had never forgotten the person who had appeared in Nuwa Palace back then. This also made her hesitate for a moment, but she quickly threw this hesitation to the back of her mind. The great tribulation of heaven and earth, and all living beings fall into oblivion. Now that the 3 realms have been pierced through, you have caused a great disaster and caused all living beings in the 3 realms to suffer a great calamity. Don't tell me you want to leave just like that. Nuwa said coldly. Hiss. As Nuwa's words fell, everyone's expression changed slightly. They quietly looked at Nuwa, and their eyes flashed with uncertainty. Favoritism, naked favoritism. Nuwa was clearly favoring the ancient demon court, and she wanted to push all the responsibility to Yi Xian. She was clearly using this as an excuse to punish Yi Xian. Now, even a fool could tell that Nuwa was using this as an excuse to make things difficult for Yi Xian. One had to know that the great tribulation of heaven and earth was started by the ancient demon court, and the ancient demon court was the instigator. However, Nuwa had pushed the blame to Yi Xian. This was clearly a great injustice. However, no one present dared to stand up for Yi Xian, because what a saint said was the truth. Only someone who was tired of living would stand up for Yi Xian. Humiliation, a great humiliation, it could even be called a great humiliation. At this moment, Yi Xian's face was extremely red, and the heaven-destroying halberd in his hand was trembling slightly. Yi Xian looked at Nuwa with an extremely terrifying killing intent. The strong were as heavy as a mountain, and the weak were like ants. This was the law of this world. The weak had no right to speak, and could not resist at all. If a saint said that you were wrong, then you were wrong. All explanations would be useless. At this moment, Yi Xian completely understood that Nuwa had no intention of letting him leave today. No matter how much he endured, he would only be met with a certain death. Then what do you want? Clang! Yi Xian stabbed his halberd into the ground, and the entire ancient demon court shook violently. Since enduring was useless, there was no need for him to endure any longer. He wanted to see what Nuwa wanted. When Yi Xian displayed his monstrous ferocity and faced Nuwa directly, everyone felt their hair stand on end. They looked at Yi Xian as if he was crazy. Oh no, something big is going to happen. Is this Yi Xian crazy? He actually dares to be disrespectful to Lady Nuwa. Could it be that he's courting death? Celestial Emperor, hurry up and apologize to Mother Nuwa. Kuan Peng had woken up at some point. At this moment, half of his body had exploded, but he was still weakly transmitting his voice to Yi Xian. Unfortunately, Yi Xian did not respond. He looked at Nuwa with a fierce gaze, and a raging fire burned in his eyes. The world is in chaos, and all living things are suffering. As the instigator, you must be punished. Your pre-saint cultivation will be destroyed, and you will be sealed in Nuwa's palace for 12.8 million years. Only then will you be forgiven for your sins, Nuwa said sternly, ignoring Yi Xian's murderous intent. Ha! Suddenly, Yi Xian let out a wild laugh. He seemed to be unable to catch his breath from laughing, and only after a few breaths did his wild laughter stop. However, his following actions caused everyone to be completely stunned on the spot. They simply couldn't believe their own eyes. Destroy my cultivation. Have you asked my heaven-destroying halberd? Boom boom boom. The halberd flew across the sky, and a vicious aura shot into the sky. Boundless darkness covered the sky, and a terrifying chaotic fog surrounded Yi Xian. Under everyone's incredulous gaze, Yi Xian's face was ferocious and cruel. When he took a step forward, the ground beneath his feet cracked, and he attacked Nuwa with his halberd. Attacking a saint? Yi Xian dared to attack a saint. When this scene appeared, everyone was scared silly on the spot. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. When the world was created, all living things were born. Saints had always been high and mighty. No one had ever heard of any living thing daring enough to attack a saint. Crazy, Yi Xian was completely crazy. At this moment, this thought appeared in everyone's mind. They could not understand why Yi Xian dared to do this if he was not crazy. Did Yi Xian not know the consequences of his actions? Did he not know that he would die? Just as everyone was in a daze, they saw a ray of holy light that was like a waterfall of heaven and earth. It sent Yi Xian flying, and the heaven-destroying halberd in his hand fell to the ground with a clang. Pfft! Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of blood. A terrifying wound appeared on his chest, and his white bones were faintly discernible. His entire body crashed heavily to the ground. There was no earth-shattering power, nor was there any scene of destruction. It was just a ray of holy light, and it had severely injured Yi Xian to the ground. The power of a saint was the power of heaven and earth. Every move of a saint contained the power of heaven and earth. Not to mention that Yi Xian was already severely injured. Even if he was at his peak, he would not be able to withstand a saint's attack. Everyone below a saint is an ant. Since you are so stubborn, I have no choice but to destroy your soul and scatter it between heaven and earth. Nuwa spoke in a dignified manner. The holy light around her bloomed faintly. Although it did not have the power to destroy mountains and rivers, it was enough to make anyone who saw it feel extremely terrified. Cough, cough, cough. A series of light coughs came from Yi Xian's mouth. Nuwa frowned. Yi Xian actually supported himself on the ground with his arms and slowly stood up. However, blood foam kept flowing out of his mouth, and blue veins were wriggling on his forehead, proving how much pain he was suffering at the moment. A saint's attack seemed casual, but it was not something that Yi Xian could withstand. If his physical body was not comparable to that of an ancestral sorcerer, any other sage-to-be would have been sent flying and their physical body would have been shattered to pieces and they would have died. Nuwa, you bitch. If I, Yi Xian, don't die today, I will tear you into pieces one day and make sure that you will never be reincarnated. Yi Xian stood up, bathed in blood. He stared at Nuwa with his blood-red eyes. He was like an evil spirit that had crawled out of hell as he roared at Nuwa. If looks could kill, Nuwa would have been cut into pieces. Chapter 777. Insulting a saint. This was a crime that was punishable by death. There was no room for negotiation. Empress Nuwa's face was flushed. Her graceful and dignified face was filled with killing intent. Clearly, she was really angry. Chi. Like a divine whip of heaven and earth, like the 9 heavens and the Milky Way, the heaven and earth were twisted to the extreme. Nuwa casually shot out a beam of holy light and sent Yi Xian flying again. Bang! The power of a saint was terrifying. This blow directly caused Yi Xian's chest to explode. Once again, he fell heavily to the ground. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. Brother. Celestial Emperor. Husband. The people of the celestial court cried out in grief. However, they were powerless in the face of a saint. This was a fatal situation. Little ant, how dare you insult a saint? You deserve to die. Empress Nuwa's face was murderous. Her voice was extremely cold. Her eyes were flashing with killing intent. Her slender hands were emitting holy light. Clearly, Yi Xian, this disaster, could not be left alive today. Yi Xian, aren't you very arrogant? Get up and kill us 2 brothers. Ha! Emperor Jun was covered in blood. His teeth had been broken by Yi Xian. At this moment, he was shouting incoherently. Extremely wild and excited laughter came from his mouth. Humans are like ants. They don't know the power of heaven. Empress Nuwa is one of the 6 great saints. If she wants you dead, how can you survive? Dong Huang Tai growled coldly. Bah, Yi Tiandi. What bullshit celestial court? How dare you insult a saint? Just this alone will make you die without a burial place. Immortal Wang of the South Pole stomped his feet and scolded, gloating. He looked at Yi Xian as if he was looking at a dead man. Amit Ba. Duo Bao Rulai chanted the mantra of the merciful Buddha and looked at Yi Xian indignantly. Yi Xian, you are a demon who has wreaked havoc in the 3 realms. First, you slaughtered all the living beings in the 3 realms. Then, you insulted the saints. Today, you will die. That's right. Such a scourge should be killed. I implore your Highness Nuwa to punish him and return peace to the heaven, earth, and man realms. The Emperor of Fengdu spoke righteously and even bowed to Nuwa. Ridicule, mockery, contempt, and even more ruthless and silent killing intent. When Yuhua made a move against Yi Xian, the various forces added insult to injury. They looked at Yi Xian with cruel expressions because everyone knew that Yi Xian would not live past today. Yi Xian, you piece of trash. Weren't you very arrogant just now? Why are you lying on the ground like a dead dog now? Why don't you stand up? Ha! Looking at Yi Xian lying on the ground covered in blood, Emperor Jun felt extremely refreshed. He even sneered. Obviously, he was in an extremely good mood that Yi Xian had fallen into such a state. Celestial Emperor. Looking at Yi Xian's miserable appearance, the few remaining Daluo Jingxian in the celestial court burst into tears. Even the 3 sages-to-be were in despair and speechless. They knew that they had lost their momentum. Ka, ka, ka. Suddenly, the sound of bones cracking could be heard, causing the mocking laughter to abruptly stop. It was all because Yi Xian had actually supported himself with his arms in an attempt to stand up. Covered in blood and with his arms twisted, Yi Xian's body was trembling. However, his eyes were blood-red and mournful, as if he was using all his strength to stand up. Yi Xian's arms desperately supported himself on the ground, but his injuries were too severe. It was so severe that it was impossible for him to stand up again. Crack! The sound of bones cracking rang out. Yi Xian's arms were unable to bear the heavy burden as they snapped. His body, which had just been propped up, once again crashed to the ground. Puff! Yi Xian spat out a mouthful of blood. He was really going to die. At this moment, his mind was muddled and he wanted to fall asleep. Ha! Look at this trash. He is already in such a state and still wants to hold on. Emperor Jun sneered after recovering from the shock. However, as Emperor Jun laughed, he felt that something was wrong. At this moment, all the forces were silent and focused on Yi Xian. You! Emperor Jun frowned. Just as he was about to say something, he saw a scene from the corner of his eye that made him feel sluggish. Yi Xian was badly mutilated, but he continued to squirm on the ground. Both of his arms were broken, and his pale white hand bones were exposed. However, he actually ignored the pain of his broken arm and forcefully used his exposed hand bones to support himself on the ground in an attempt to stand up again. Ouch! Following an extremely painful groan from Yi Xian's mouth, he actually stood up shakily once again. However, his arms were continuously dripping with blood. His pale white hand bones were blood-red and mournful, causing one's soul to tremble to the extreme with a single glance. Such a scene made Emperor Jun speechless. He stared at Yi Xian in a daze. The sarcasm on his face gradually disappeared and his fists were slightly clenched. Why? Why? Why are you still so persistent when you are in such a state? Don't you even want to submit to a sage? Emperor Jun roared loudly and looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. Why should I submit to a sage? Yi Xian's body was shaking as if he would fall again at any time. However, his spine was still as straight as a pine tree. Even if the sky fell, it would not bend him at all. Do you know that you are going to die today? Why are you still lingering at death's door? Emperor Jun could not understand why Yi Xian was so stubborn. Even at this time, he was still so proud. Even in the face of a sage, he still did not show the slightest weakness. Not only Emperor Jun, but all the sages-to-be were looking at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. Because no one could understand why Yi Xian was so stubborn that he could not even submit to a sage. Do you know why you can't become a sage? Yi Xian was in a trance. He was like a lamp that had run out of oil and was surrounded by wisps of death qi. However, at this moment, he suddenly said such a sentence. "Wh? Why?" Emperor Jun murmured to himself. He suddenly looked at Yi Xian and said, "If you want to become a sage, you naturally need the Hongmeng immortal qi. This is a well-known fact." Cough, cough, cough. Yi Xian was coughing violently, and blood was flowing out of his mouth. However, he looked at Emperor Jun calmly, without the slightest ripple. In the fight for the Great Way, if you don't advance, you will fall behind. The Hongmeng immortal qi is just a foreign object. Even if you become a sage, you will be shackled by heaven and earth. Not afraid of heaven and earth, not afraid of death. Even in the face of a sage, I have to have the heart to fight. This is also my dharma and Tao. If I have to submit to a sage, how can I, Yi Xian, become a sage in the future? Like a thunder in the chaos, like a huge wave in the Milky Way, when Yi Xian's voice resounded between heaven and earth, everyone was in a daze. They completely turned into clay puppets, silent and motionless. In the fight for the Great Way, if you don't advance, you will fall behind? Emperor Jun murmured to himself, his body and mind trembling. At this moment, he seemed to have understood something. He slightly clenched his fists, and a touch of bitterness flashed across his eyes. Chapter 778. That's right, it wasn't just him, Di Jun, who had always believed that if he wanted to become a saint, he would need the primordial violet qi. All the creatures in the world thought the same, and he was even more respectful towards saints. However, after hearing Yi Xian's words today, Di Jun finally understood a principle that he hadn't understood since ancient times. If one did not have the will to fight against heaven and earth and succumb to the sages forever, there would be a flaw in one's Taoist heart. How could one become a sage then? We've lost. We accept our loss wholeheartedly. Dong Huang Tai's voice was extremely bitter. Even though Nuwa had killed Yi Xian today, Dong Huang Tai was an extremely proud person. He finally knew why he and Di Jun had lost to Yi Xian. It was not because of cultivation or the formation of heaven and earth, but because of their Taoist heart. Yi Xian, please accept my bow. Only you deserve the title of Heaven Sovereign. From now on, Di Jun and I are not worthy of it. Dong Huang Tai bowed to Yi Xian. He had put aside the hostile relationship and sincerely bowed to Yi Xian because he accepted his loss wholeheartedly. Yi Tiandi, although I can't wait to kill you and eat your flesh and drink your blood, I accept my loss wholeheartedly today. Please accept my bow. Di Jun bowed deeply to Yi Xian. There was no longer any sarcasm on his face. There was only shame and shame. The two great demon emperors were both peerless figures and had their own pride. They were definitely not sinister and cunning people. Today, they had indeed lost. Not only had they had also lost in terms of their Tao hearts. This bow was also their respect for Yi Xian, and even more so for their great enemy. Yi Tiandi, if you and I were not enemies, we would definitely be willing to make friends with you. We would even be willing to drink and chat merrily with you. Unfortunately, an enemy is an enemy after all. Today, your death is the most shameful thing for us. Yi Tiandi, rest in peace. Di Jun and Dong Huang Tai bowed 3 times. Although Yi Xian was their enemy, they only admired him at this moment. They knew that if they were in Yi Xian's position, they would have already bowed to the sages and even knelt down. Heaven Sovereign, rest in peace. Boom. Thousands of ancient demons, sages-to-be, and countless demon tribes all bowed to Yi Xian because Yi Xian was indeed a peerless figure. Yi was their respect for Yi Xian. He led the celestial court against the demon tribes of the 3 realms and suppressed the 2 demon emperors. He was fearless even in the face of a sage and even dared to attack a sage. What happened today would forever be remembered in the 3 realms. It would let all living things know that there was once such a brilliant person in the past. Yi Xian would also become an immortal legend. The heavens and earth shook and all living things howled. They were respectfully sending off Yi Xian because from now on, there would be one less peerless figure in the world. At this moment, Nuwa's expression was unsettled, and her heart trembled to the extreme. This was because she was terrified to discover one thing. Yi Xian had actually caused everyone to acknowledge him, and they even felt great admiration for him from the bottom of their hearts. Even the two great demon emperors were convinced of his strength. Terrifying, too terrifying. Nuwa deeply understood that even the 6 great saints and all living things in the world might not be convinced, but Yi Xian had done it today. Nuwa stared fixedly at Yi Xian. Extreme fear flickered in her eyes because she seemed to see a kind of radiance blossoming from Yi Xian's body. This kind of radiance was extremely terrifying. Even as a saint, she felt a sense of trepidation. If Yi Xian doesn't die today, he will definitely settle things with me when he becomes a saint in the future. Nuwa suddenly had this thought. It was as if there was a voice from the unseen world telling her that Yi Xian could not be left alive today. Otherwise, she would definitely suffer an unimaginable calamity in the future. Yi Xian must die. Suddenly, Nuwa's face turned extremely cold. She finally made up her mind. She could not let Yi Xian live. If Yi Xian lived, he would definitely be a calamity for her in the future. Rumble. The world shook and chaos lingered. Nuwa's body emitted sacred light. She lifted her slender hand and the light that could annihilate all living things bloomed. She was obviously going to kill Yi Xian on the spot in the next moment, even if not leaving behind a trace of his soul. Am I going to die? Looking at Nuwa's cold and emotionless eyes, Yi Xian looked at the sky and asked himself. There was self-mockery and bitterness in his eyes. He was extremely unwilling. Yi Xian was unwilling to die here because he still had a lot of things to do. However, he could not resist and had used up all his trump cards. Even if he used all his trump cards when he was at his peak, he would still be powerless against Nuwa. Only death awaited him. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. A trace of relief appeared on his face. Although he did not want to die, he had already come to this point. There was nothing he could do to reverse the situation. Wait. Suddenly, at this critical moment, a heavy voice rang out. Nuwa frowned and looked towards the source of the voice. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. He did not know who could save his life at this time. Fellow Nuwa, do you really want to kill him? Zhen Yuanzi, the ancestor of earthly immortals, was a person who had existed since the beginning of the world. He was also known as the ancestor of all immortals. His reputation was unimaginably great. If he was not only a quasi-sage, his reputation as the ancestor of all immortals would not be inferior to the 6 great sages of the world. Zhen Yuanzi, do you want to save him? Nuwa said in a dignified voice. Her eyes were filled with great dissatisfaction. Yi Xian is fated with this penniless Taoist, how could this penniless Taoist not save him? Zhen Yuanzi was neither haughty nor humble when facing a sage. This was because he was the ancestor of earthly immortals. In the past, before Nuwa became a sage, she also called him fellow Taoist and they even had some friendship. Even death cannot wipe out his crimes for insulting a sage. You can't save him. Nuwa said coldly. Since she had already made her decision, Yi Xian must die today. Buzz. Suddenly, ripples appeared in the void and a guqin appeared in the void. When this guqin appeared, Nuwa's expression changed slightly. She looked at Zhen Yuanzi with an extremely unfriendly gaze. In the past, I helped fellow Taoist Fuxi to become a quasi-sage. This Fuxi guqin was given to me by him. He also made a promise to me that if I ever need your help, I can use this Fuxi guqin to make you and your sister promise me one thing. I wonder if fellow Taoist Nuwa will fulfill your brother's promise to me. Zhen Yuanzi said with a smile. Silence, silence, dead silence. Nuwa looked at the Fuxi guqin with a complicated expression. This was her brother's spiritual treasure. She naturally knew that Fuxi owed Zhen Yuanzi a favor in the early years of the untainted land. However, she did not expect that Zhen Yuanzi would use this to ask her to spare Yi Xian's life. Chapter 779. Jin Yuanzi, are you threatening me? Nua's voice was icy cold. She looked at Jin Yuanzi with an extremely unfriendly gaze. There was even a faint hint of anger in her eyes. Fellow Nua, you're a saint. How would I dare to threaten you? It's just the cycle of karma. Today, I'm just asking for the favor that Fushi owed me in the past, Jin Yuanzi said tirelessly. As Jin Yuanzi's words fell, Nua's face became gloomy and uncertain. She was clearly in a state of great hesitation. As the saying goes, the love between siblings runs deep. If there was one person that Nua cared about the most, it would be Fushi because he was her elder brother. Today, Jin Yuanzi came to ask for a favor from her. This put her in a dilemma. Everyone's breathing quickened. When Nua fell into a dilemma, everyone's eyes also focused on her. This was because if Yi Xian did not die today, there would definitely be more variables in the future. Jin Yuanzi, I can't agree to your request. After a full 10 breaths of time, Nua hesitated no more. Her voice was cold and emotionless as she directly rejected Jin Yuanzi's request. This also caused Jin Yuanzi's originally smiling expression to freeze. His brows were deeply furrowed together. Fellow Nua, are you really going to ignore your elder brother? Jin Yuanzi said in a low voice. The favor of the past will be repaid in the future. However, today, Yi Xian must die. Nua said coldly. She knew very well that Yi Xian was a great future trouble. If she spared his life today, if he really became a saint in the future, the two of them would not rest until one of them was dead. This was definitely not an outcome that she wanted to see. Back down. The laws of heaven and earth suddenly pressed down on Jin Yuanzi, causing Jin Yuanzi to retreat more than 10 steps. An extremely grave expression appeared on his face. Rumble. The holy light of heaven and earth once again descended as Nua raised her jade-like hand. This time, no one could stop her from killing Yi Xian. Master. Suddenly, a beautiful figure quietly appeared in front of Yi Xian. The Empyrean fairy's eyes were filled with tears as she knelt on the ground and repeatedly kowtowed to Nua. Clear tears flowed down her cheeks and dripped to the ground. Mystic fairy, go away. Nua was startled, and her voice was cold and emotionless. Master, if you want to kill someone, then kill me. I only beg that you spare his life. Empyrean fairy begged humbly as she stood firmly in front of Yi Xian. Hurry up and leave. You can't stop her. Yi Xian had never thought that the Empyrean fairy would actually stand in front of him when he was about to die. This made Yi Xian's expression extremely complicated. He wanted to pull the Empyrean fairy up and get her to leave as soon as possible. This was because Yi Xian could already tell that Nua would not let her go today. Even though the Empyrean fairy was her disciple, Nua would not let her go. Yi Xian, do you know? I don't know when it started, but my heart has been filled with you. You are my husband, the Empyrean fairy. If you die, why should I live alone? The Empyrean fairy smiled miserably. Her smile was filled with indescribable emotions, which made Yi Xian's eyes glaze over. His heart trembled to the extreme. Is it really worth it? Yi Xian's eyes were in a daze. His heart was trembling. Scenes of him getting to know the Empyrean fairy flashed through his mind as he mumbled to himself. It is. The Empyrean fairy was still smiling, but tears were flowing down her cheeks. Yi Xian was speechless as he stared at the tears on the Empyrean fairy's cheeks. He never thought that he would have any feelings for the Empyrean fairy. Back then, he only married her to solidify his position as the Celestial Emperor. He only treated her as a toy. Yi Xian really didn't know when the Empyrean fairy had developed such feelings for him. Today, she actually stood in front of him when Nua was about to attack him. Evil creature. Nua coldly rebuked, her eyes brimming with killing intent. Even though the Empyrean fairy was her disciple, if she dared to stop her from killing Yi Xian today, she would mercilessly strike back. She would not show the slightest regard for their relationship as master and disciple. Martial ant, run. Suddenly, a voice filled with despair rang out. Something that no one had expected happened. Rumble. The mountain and river painting, Nua's spirit treasure, suddenly pressed down on Nua's head. Extremely dense origin immortal light erupted as it attempted to suppress Nua. The attacker was none other than Shuefunga, who had always been by Nua's side. She was also Lu Baiyi's disciple, Xueji, and a hidden chess piece that Yi Xian had placed by Nua's side. Xueji's clothes were as white as snow, as if she was dressed like Lu Baiyi in the past. At this moment, she was smiling, but there was a deep sense of parting and bitterness in her eyes. Her body was swaying as she poured all of her cultivation into the mountain and river map. She only wanted to fight for Yi Xian's last chance at survival. Don't. Yi Xian was jolted awake. His eyes were bloodshot as he let out a heart-wrenching roar. He deeply understood that Xueji's sneak attack on Nuwa would result in a tragic end. How could he ever face Lu Baiyi? Martial ant, I'm sorry. Xueji is about to leave. This is the only thing I can do. I've already refined the mountain and river painting once more. It should be able to delay her for 10 breaths of time. Xueji's body was falling apart as blood soaked her body, but she was still weeping and urging Yi Xian to run. Rumble. The map of mountains and rivers of the gods of earth and Vale was glowing. It was a primordial spiritual treasure and one of the most precious treasures in Goddess Nviwa's possession. She had given it to Xueji. However, Goddess Nviwa had never thought that her disciple, whom she had carefully cultivated, would betray her at this critical moment and bring her great trouble. Traitor! Nuwa was finally enraged. She had never been so furious before. First, it was the Empyrean fairy's betrayal. Now, even Shuefunga had betrayed her. This had utterly humiliated her and made her, a dignified saint, into a laughingstock. Rumble. The mountain and river painting was pressing down. 3 breaths of time had passed and Yi Xian was only left with 7 breaths of time. By the time Nuwa reacted, Yi Xian would definitely not be able to escape. Run! Yi Xian was a decisive person and definitely not an indecisive one. He deeply understood that everything Xueji had done would be in vain if he didn't escape. Rumble. Yi Xian forcibly raised his cultivation and was about to turn into a beam of light and escape. But before he could escape, a dozen figures suddenly surrounded him. They were Duo Bao Rulai, Emperor of Fengdu, and the others. You want to escape? Do you think you can? Emperor of Fengdu's murderous intent completely blocked Yi Xian's escape route. Celestial Emperor, run! Rumble. The few remaining members of the Celestial Court madly attacked Emperor of Fengdu and the others. The 3 sage-to-be were seriously injured, but they also threw a palm strike at Emperor of Fengdu, hoping to open up a way for Yi Xian to escape. Bang! There was a sky-high explosion and the void was destroyed. The mountain and river painting above Nuwa's head suddenly exploded. It didn't even wait for 10 breaths of time. It was also at this moment that the sacred light of heaven and earth sealed the sky and earth. Yi Xian's last hope of escape was also completely cut off. Traitor, you deserve to die. Everyone below the Saint Realm was an ant. Xueji had underestimated Nuwa's Saint Realm cultivation. She only managed to delay for 5 breaths of time and was greeted by a sacred light of heaven and earth. Bang! No! The sky exploded and her body exploded. Under Yi Xian's shrill roar, Xueji was annihilated by the sacred light of heaven and earth. Her flesh and blood were quickly annihilated, but she still smiled at Yi Xian before she died. Xueji. Yi Xian had completely lost his mind. When he saw Xueji die tragically at the hands of Nuwa, an unimaginable demonic light violently bloomed around him. The boundless blood qi of heaven and earth filled the air. Nuwa, I'm going to tear you to pieces. Yi Xian didn't know where he got the strength from, but he suddenly threw a punch at Nuwa. The demonic light that exploded the sky was terrifying and dazzling, but this attack had no effect on Nuwa. Bang! A sacred light annihilated Yi Xian's fist radiance and knocked him to the ground again. It was also at this moment that the chaotic heavenly sword appeared in the void and quietly fell above Yi Xian. It was releasing a mighty power that could suppress and destroy the spirit. No one can stop you. Today, this saint wants your soul to disperse and die. Nuwa's aura was cold and emotionless. She was truly enraged. She walked slowly towards Yi Xian because she wanted to kill Yi Xian with her own hands with the chaotic heavenly sword. Rumble. Everything in the chaotic world was distorted. When Nuwa held the sword in her hand, the sacred light of heaven and earth illuminated the three realms. Even the great stars in the luminous starry sky stopped rotating. Die! Boom! Nuwa finally slashed her sword at Yi Xian. This sword could destroy heaven and earth, this sword could sweep through the starry sky. This sword could bury all things. No one could survive this sword. Enough! Suddenly, the universe was filled with murderous cries from all directions. The laws of heaven and earth exploded. The clouds in 100 million miles were destroyed. A speck of green light fell from the sky and blasted the chaotic heavenly sword out of Nuwa's hand. It also sent Nuwa flying back tens of thousands of miles. Her expression changed drastically as she looked at the sky in horror. Chapter 780. Heaven and earth froze as killing intent soared into the sky. The universe was in turmoil, and the three realms were trembling slightly. It was as if an ancient ferocious god was awakening in the depths of the luminous sun's starry sky, looking down at the three realms with eyes that could destroy all life. What had happened? The eight forces and the quasi-saints were all trembling because they saw Nuwa slashing at Yi Xian with her sword, but she was blasted back tens of thousands of miles by a beam of azure light from beyond the heavens. Terrifying, too terrifying. It was so terrifying that even their souls were trembling. Who was Nuwa? She was one of the 6 great saints of the world. To be able to force a saint back, the other party's background was simply unimaginably terrifying. Senior brother. Suddenly, Nuwa's aura turned cold. She looked up into the sky, and her voice was extremely cold. Clearly, she knew who had saved Yi Xian's life. Rumble. A figure, Tong Tian, was standing on the ground. The beam of killing saint light bloomed brightly in the luminous sun, and the great stars were vanishing one after another. It was as if everything in the world was trembling because of this person's appearance. Tong Tian. Suddenly, an extremely horrifying scream was heard. The immortal Wang of the South Pole's face was pale, and his entire body went limp on the ground. This also proved the extent of his fear. Thump, thump, thump. Dressed in azure robes, the killing intent was biting cold, and the majestic bearing of a man who looked down on all eternity. Tong Tian walked over from beyond the heavens, and with every step he took, the stars vanished with a bang. His power was simply unimaginably terrifying. Boom! The killing saint light covered the heavens and the earth, and a vision of azure lotuses appeared in the sky. Tong Tian finally stood in the firmament, but he was expressionless as he looked calmly at Nuwa. Senior brother, are you going to save him? Nuwa asked coldly. The saint light around her was in disorder, proving that her heart was in turmoil. Jie School was born because of him and exists because of him. Junior sister, you can't kill him, Tong Tian said calmly. Looking at Tong Tian's indifferent expression, Nuwa frowned, her eyes showing an extremely serious expression. She had never thought that Tong Tian would actually make a move and save Yi Xian at the most critical moment. This made her feel extremely troubled. Who was Tong Tian? Not only was he a sage, but he was also one of the 3 pure ones. He also had the fairy-slaying sword formation and the ultimate formation of heaven and earth. In the past, he had relied on his own strength to fight against 4 sages. Although the formation was broken and he lost in the end, just this battle alone had established Tongtian's supreme reputation. He had single-handedly fought against 4 sages, and even the strongest sage, Lao Tzu. Although the fairy-slaying sword formation played a large part in this battle, it also proved how terrifying Tong Tian was. Today, if Tong Tian insisted on saving Yi Xian, she, Nuwa, would not be able to stop him. She was even less likely to be a match for Tong Tian. She was very clear about this matter. Senior brother is wise. Yi Xian insulted a sage and caused a great disaster, causing a calamity to the world. He deserved to die. Nuwa frowned, hoping to persuade Tong Tian to leave. Junior sister, senior brother knows what you're thinking. However, don't blame senior brother for not caring about our relationship today. You won't be able to kill Yi Xian. The Grand Master of Heaven said in a low voice. You. Nuwa's expression froze. Then, it instantly turned gloomy. She never thought that Tong Tian would actually not give her any face because of a mere Yi Xian. Tong Tian, don't tell me you're going to fall out with me and become enemies with me because of an ant like him? Nuwa said coldly. As a sage, if she could not kill Yi Xian today, wouldn't she become the laughingstock of the 3 realms? Fall out with me and become enemies? Ha! 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 Tong Tian laughed maniacally. His laughter shook the world as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. Suddenly, Tongtian's laughter stopped. He looked coldly at Nuwa. Tongtian's earth-shaking, killing sacred light rolled through the 3 realms. His voice that looked down on all living beings also sounded. Nuwa, although you and I are both sages, do you think you're qualified to become enemies with me? Or have you forgotten what kind of person I am after all this time? Huh? When Tongtian's oppressive voice rang out, the killing sacred light in the world crisscrossed. It was as if the 3 realms were about to collapse. Hiss! Gasps could be heard from all directions. When Tong Tian revealed his powerful and terrifying side, all living beings fell limp to the ground. They looked at Tong Tian with eyes full of fear. Tong Tian, don't go too far. As a sage, Nuwa naturally could not admit defeat. She loudly reprimanded Tong Tian. However, her eyes were extremely serious. Clearly, Tongtian's battle prowess was too terrifying. Nuwa alone was definitely not a match for Tong Tian. However, if she did not kill Yi Xian today, Yi Xian would definitely become a huge problem for her. This was definitely not an outcome she wanted to see. Tong Tian, do you want to start a war with me? Nuwa reprimanded. The sacred light of heaven and earth whistled out, and the heavenly Tao's laws descended. It was as if she was about to attack Tong Tian in the next moment. Nuwa, since you're also Master Hongjuan's disciple, I don't want to make things difficult for you. As long as you retreat today and don't make things difficult for Yi Xian in the future, I'll owe you a favor, Tong Tian said coldly. It seemed like he was advising Nuwa, but in fact, it was also a threat. Impossible. Nuwa did not hesitate at all and directly reprimanded Tong Tian. This was not only related to her dignity as a sage, but also the karma between her and Yi Xian. Tong Tian, don't forget. Although you're one of the 3 pure ones, you offended the 4 great sages during the great god investiture tribulation. If you put me on the opposite side today, I'm afraid your Jie school will not have a good ending, Nuwa directly said. She was also telling Tong Tian the consequences of doing so. Obviously, Tong Tian had fought the 4 great sages alone during the great god investiture tribulation in the past. This had already formed a huge grudge. If he offended Nuwa today, Tong Tian could really be said to be isolated and helpless among the sages. Rumble. Tong Tian moved the ground. The sun and moon lost their light. 4 green rays suddenly fell from the sky. 4 murderous swords floated in the sky. The immortal slaying swords poured down in torrents, causing the world to be in chaos and illuminating Tongtian's divine might. Buzz! The 4 immortal slaying swords rotated endlessly. The world's spacetime was slightly distorted. The wisps of immortal slaying swords' light were soul-stirring. Tongtian also looked at Yi Xian at this time. A bright smile appeared on his face. Yi Xian. Yi Xian greets the sect master. Yi Xian was seriously injured and on the verge of death. His whole body was filled with the aura of death. However, he was still hanging on by a breath because he did not want to die. If he did not destroy Nua's soul, how could he be willing to die? Chapter 781. Yi Xian, you were right back then. When have I, Tongtian, ever compromised? If I, Tongtian, choose to compromise, would I still be the Tongtian who controls the 4 immortal slaying swords? Tongtian smiled. His smile only bloomed for Yi Xian because it was Yi Xian who made him understand himself. Ever since the great god investiture tribulation, his will had been depressed. He had been silent in the aquamarine palace for countless years and had even given up on Yi Xian in order to protect the Jie school. However, Tongtian would never forget what Yi Xian said to him when he left the aquamarine palace. When had Tongtian ever been afraid of someone who dared to face the 4 great sages alone? When had he ever compromised? After countless years had passed, his hostility seemed to be on the verge of being ground away. His temperament, which had once looked down on the past and present, was even more silent. Until Yi Xian left the roaming Jade Palace, the Grand Master of Heaven had been pondering over this question. When the 2 celestial courts started fighting, Tongtian sat cross-legged in the aquamarine palace. He personally witnessed Yi Xian's will to go against the current. Even when faced with Nua's merciless suppression, Yi Xian did not have the slightest fear. Yi Xian was not a saint, but he was fearless in the face of a saint. He even shouted the words, "If you don't advance, you will fall behind." Tongtian finally woke up from his stupor. He also finally regained his fearless fighting spirit. It was also at this moment that he finally walked out of the aquamarine palace and saved Yi Xian from Nua's hands. "Sect Master, I'm not the 7th heaven-ordained saint. Have you really thought it through?" Although Yi Xian was seriously injured and dying, his mind was very clear. This was because he was not the 7th heaven-ordained saint. If Tongtian fought with Nua to save his life today, it would not benefit Tongtian at all. Ha! Tongtian laughed wildly and said, "Yi Xian, what 7th heaven-ordaining saint? I, Tongtian, may have cared about these things before, but today, I, Tongtian, don't care about these things. Since you, Yi Xian, have helped my Jie school and have a good relationship with me, I can't be at ease if I don't protect your life. Thank you, Sect Master. I, Yi Xian, will remember your kindness today. I will definitely repay you double in the future." Yi Xian cupped his hands and bowed. His voice was extremely weak, but it was powerful and resonant. "Senior brother, you're too rash." Nua suddenly scolded. She looked at Yi Xian with murderous intent. Not only did she hate Yi Xian, but she also wanted to kill Yi Xian. "I'll give you 3 breaths of time. If you don't retreat, don't blame me for disregarding our relationship as senior brother and junior sister," Tongtian roared coldly. "Tongtian, do you really think I'm afraid of you?" As a saint, if Nua were to retreat, she would definitely be ridiculed by the people of the 3 realms. Moreover, as a saint, Tongtian could not kill her. Celestial End. Rumble. His sword pointed to the sky, and with a loud boom, the 4 immortal extermination swords rotated in the universe. The celestial end sword suddenly lit up, and its killing holy light filled the air. It turned into billions of miles of green light that slashed towards Nua. He attacked without any hesitation. This was Tongtian, who had found his true self. Even if the 5 great saints were to become his enemies, he had no fear. The 4 immortal extermination swords were the number 1 killing weapon of the heavenly Tao. The celestial end sword was only one of them. In the past, it was used by Shen Gongbao as Yi Xian's Tao protector treasure. However, it did not display any particularly terrifying power. It was not that the celestial end sword was weak, but it depended on who had it. At this moment, Tong Tian was using the celestial end sword, and the terrifying power it created was simply terrifying. Go! Facing Tong Tian's sudden attack, the killing green light filled the celestial end sword. Nua's expression instantly turned serious. She suddenly threw out the innate spiritual treasure, the red embroidered ball, and it went straight for the celestial end sword. Rumble! The battle between saints was destructive. When the celestial end sword and the red embroidered ball collided, the boundless world quickly collapsed. The holy light that annihilated the 3 realms shot out in all directions, and all living things were about to be buried under the might of the saints. Clang! The red embroidered ball's holy light trembled, and the celestial end sword hummed. After a loud explosion, the red embroidered ball was blasted away by the celestial end sword, and Nua's figure retreated 1,000,000 miles, barely avoiding the celestial end sword light. Terrifying, too terrifying. Tong Tian only used the celestial end sword to force Nua to retreat. When this scene fell into the eyes of everyone looked at Tong Tian with great awe. The old legend. There were 6 saints in the world. Except for Hung Jun, who represented the heavenly Tao with his body, the strongest among the 6 saints was Lao Tzu, the head of the 3 pure ones. Except for Dao Tianzuan and Lao Tzu, Tong Tian was the strongest among the other 5 saints. Yuanshi Tianzuan and Tongtian's cultivation were on par, but Tong Tian had the fairy-slaying sword formation, so he was ranked behind Tong Tian. Behind Yuanshi Tianzuan were the 2 saints of the West, and Nuwa was the weakest among the 6 saints. Of course, the so-called strength was just a general statement. Saints were immortal and existed as long as the world. A saint could not kill a saint. This was an unchanging iron law. But today, the prime of Tong Tian had shown his cultivation that could overlook the past and present, and Goddess Nviwa was at a disadvantage. This also proved that the rumors were true. Goddess Nviwa was indeed the weakest among the 6 great sages. Tong Tian, you've gone too far. Nuwa's hands formed a seal, and the holy light of heaven and earth covered the sky and earth. She condensed the heavenly Tao law and displayed the saint's technique. She was really angry and attacked Tong Tian. Immortal trapping. Tong Tian's sword was like the sky, stirring up heaven and earth, and tearing the universe apart. The immortal trapping sword released a green light, and turned into a 90,000-mile Milky Way waterfall, and attacked Nuwa. Clang, clang, clang. The 2 sages engaged in a fierce battle. For a moment, the heavens and earth darkened. The broken sky spread out in all directions. The stars in the luminous starry sky kept falling, and the vast sea of stars whizzed down, bringing an unimaginable calamity to the entire earth immortal realm. Kill Yi Xian for this saint. Suddenly, in the universe, Nuwa was retreating because she was facing Tong Tian. She was no match for him at all. But Nuwa also knew that she was no match for Tong Tian. Her real purpose today was to kill Yi Xian, and this made her rebuke all the forces. Let's see who dares. Tong Tian swung his sword, and the immortal slaying sword fell on Yi Xian's head. The killing holy light protected Yi Xian, and this made all the forces shudder. Who would dare to have the slightest disloyalty? Tong Tian, this saint and you are irreconcilable. Nuwa shouted angrily, and her attacks were even more ruthless. Unfortunately, she couldn't force Tong Tian to retreat, and she was constantly at a disadvantage. Senior brother Yuanshi, what are you waiting for? Suddenly, Nuwa raised the holy light of heaven and earth and retreated 30,000 miles. She looked up at the sky, and her face turned extremely red. Chapter 782. Junior sister is being humiliated. How can I just sit by and watch? A green lotus quietly bloomed in the sky. A middle-aged Taoist in green robes was standing on top of the green lotus. He had a warm smile on his face as he nodded at Nuwa. Greetings, Yuanshi Tianzuan. Greetings, Master. The immortal hermit of the South Pole was overjoyed. He led the immortals of the Chan sect to kneel on the ground and loudly called out Yuanshi Tianzuan's Taoist name. Everyone and the quasi-saints bowed to Yuanshi, their eyes filled with awe. If Tongtian's control of the immortal slaying four swords was unparalleled, then Yuanshi Tianzuan's understanding of the Tao could be said to be at the pinnacle. Many of the Taoist techniques were created by him. His reputation in the three realms surpassed Tongtian's. Yuanshi Tianzuan, one of the three pure ones, was one of the 6 great saints of the world. When he appeared between heaven and earth, strands of Taoist light surrounded him. Mysterious chanting sounds came from the heavens. It was as if he was the incarnation of the Tao, giving people the feeling that all laws were natural. Fellow Taoists, please rise. Yuanshi Tianzuan smiled. He didn't put on the airs of a saint at all. Instead, he gave people the feeling of a spring breeze. At this moment, Tongtian's 4 swords circled around him. He frowned at Yuanshi Tianzuan. Yuanshi Tianzuan wasn't just his senior brother, but also his fated enemy. During the war between the Chan sect and the Jie sect, many of his disciples died at the hands of the Chan sect. Even though most of the disciples who didn't die were listed on the investiture of the gods, it almost caused the Jie sect to perish in the great divine investiture tribulation. Just this karma alone was enough to make the 2 of them fight to the death. Now that Yuanshi Tianzuan had arrived, Tong Tian was not afraid. After all, he had the fairy-slaying sword formation in his hands. However, if the 2 sages joined forces to fight him, it would give him a lot of pressure. The fairy-slaying sword formation was indeed extremely powerful, and it had even fought against the 4 great sages in the past. However, this did not mean that his cultivation was stronger than Yuanshi's. Their cultivations were about the same. If the 2 great sages joined forces to fight, it would be extremely difficult for him to protect Yi Xian. After all, Yuanshi alone was a huge problem. Moreover, there was also Nuwa, who was bent on killing Yi Xian. Yi Xian, I will hold the 2 of them back. If you have the chance, escape to the lower realm. Tongtian's 4 swords circled around his body as he secretly transmitted his voice to Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's flesh was badly mutilated, and his limbs were badly damaged. His body was surrounded by wisps of death aura. Even the indestructible true spirit in his sea of consciousness had already cracked. He was already in a state of near death. However, Yi Xian stared fixedly at Nuwa and Yuanshi Tianzuan, as if he wanted to deeply imprint their appearances in his mind. When his eyes opened and closed, a cold murderous intent flashed in them. Yi Xian wished he could kill Nuwa and Yuanshi Tianzuan. However, he hated himself more. He hated his own incompetence. He hated that he did not have the cultivation of a sage. At this moment, he could only be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered, being humiliated and despised by the 2 great sages. If it were not for Tong Tian, he would definitely die today. I know the way. Yi Xian paused between each word as he secretly responded to Tong Tian. The hatred in his eyes gradually faded, and he quickly calmed himself down. Yi Xian was not a reckless man. On the contrary, he was a very smart person. Today, 2 great sages appeared. Even though he had Tongtian's protection, it was still extremely dangerous. If he made a mistake and allowed the 2 great sages to find an opportunity, it would only take a single blow to take his life. No one wanted to die. Even Yi Xian was no exception. He did not want to be sullenly killed by the sages. He wanted to live. He wanted to cross the 3 tribulations of the heavenly Tao alive until he was comparable to the sages. In the future, he would definitely settle today's karma. Kill the sages. These two simple words explained Yi Xian's intentions. However, he was currently too weak in front of the sages. He was so weak that he did not even enter the sage's eyes. Therefore, he had to escape. He could not die here. Only then could he avenge today's humiliation in the future. Greetings, senior brother Yuanshi. Nuwa bowed respectfully. The murderous aura on her face was dissipating. Clearly, Yuanshi Tianzuan's appearance had given her great confidence. Today, Yi Xian would undoubtedly die. Junior sister, there's no need to be so courteous, Yuanshi Tianzuan smiled slightly, then turned to look at Tang Tian. The smile on his face was also gradually fading. Junior brother Tang Tian, for the sake of a mere Yi Xian, you actually disregarded our relationship as fellow disciples. You even wantonly attacked junior sister Nuwa. Aren't you afraid that the beings of the three realms will laugh at you? Yuanshi Tianzuan coldly rebuked. The 12th rank blue lotus swayed beneath his feet, and strands of chaotic light beam spilled out. Yuanshi, don't talk nonsense with me. Since you dare to appear here, I might as well test your cultivation. Let's see how much you've grown after countless years. Tang Tian could not be bothered to feign civility with Yuanshi Tianzuan. The four immortal slaying swords rumbled and floated in the void in all directions. They even released a terrifying killing holy light. Junior brother Tang Tian, you're still as arrogant as before. Could it be that you've forgotten how you defeated the Aquamarine Palace back then? Yuanshi Tianzuan coldly said. Yuanshi, you bastard, how dare you humiliate me? At the mention of the investiture of the gods' war, Tang Tian flew into a rage. That was the greatest pain in his heart. Not only were his disciples killed or injured, but the entire Jie school was almost destroyed. He was also defeated by the four great sages and left in desolation. That was his greatest humiliation. Junior brother, you're overthinking. I'm just stating a fact. I hope you won't repeat the mistakes of the past, Yuanshi Tianzuan coldly replied. Then, he looked indifferently at Yi Xian. Yi Xian, you've confused the three realms and killed the innocent. Today, you even dared to humiliate junior sister Nuwa. Why don't you quickly end your own life here? Are you waiting for me to personally take action? The thunderous voice of the heavenly Tao was deafening. Yuanshi Tianzuan directly attacked Yi Xian. Yuanshi, if I don't die today, I'll settle the karma of today with you and that bitch Nuwa sooner or later, Yi Xian said coldly. He was not afraid even when facing one of the three pure ones, Yuanshi Tianzuan. Evil creature. Yuanshi Tianzuan flew into a rage. A dot of Tao light appeared on his fingertip and disturbed the laws of heaven and earth. He pointed it at Yi Xian. Rumble. The great Tao was boundless and the laws of heaven and earth fell. This was the derivation of the Tao and the power to destroy the soul. If Yuanshi Tianzuan's attack really landed on Yi Xian would definitely die. Be careful, Celestial Emperor. The members of the Celestial Court shouted in horror. However, Yi Xian did not speak or move. He ignored Yuanshi Tianzuan's attack because he knew very well that even if he dodged, he would not be able to avoid it. Moreover, Yi Xian also believed that he would not die. You can't kill him. As expected, before Yuanshi Tianzuan's attack landed, Tang Tian slashed out with a beam of killing divine light and neutralized Yuanshi Tianzuan's attack. Junior brother, are you forcing me to fight you? Yuanshi Tianzuan turned to look at Tang Tian. His body was surrounded by divine light and the rumbling of the heavenly Tao came from the void. Chapter 783. Cut the crap. Let's fight. Tang Tian bellowed angrily. You have no respect for your elders. If I don't teach you a lesson today, the living beings of the three realms will really think that I, Yuanshi, am inferior to you, Tang Tian. Yuanshi Tianzuan's expression was cold as he struck out with a saint's technique. The Tao light of the Milky Way filled the three realms and descended upon Tang Tian. Kill! The immortal slaying sword glowed. This was the sacred light of eternal slaughter. It directly shattered Yuanshi Tianzuan's saint's technique. The immortal slaying four swords emitted a clanging sound of slaughter as they charged towards Yuanshi Tianzuan. Junior sister, I'll stop this disrespectful junior brother. You quickly kill that evil creature Yi Xian. Clang! 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 Yuanshi Tianzuan waved his sleeve. Terrifying sacred light emanated and blasted away the immortal slaying four swords. All sorts of unimaginable saints' techniques were blasted out, shattering the firmament for hundreds of millions of miles. At this moment, he was fighting with Tong Tian. Who dares to kill someone that I, Tong Tian, want to protect? Tong Tian was too fierce. His sword fingers were like the sky as he pointed at Nuwa. The immortal slaying sword transformed into a green light 90,000 miles long as it blasted towards Nuwa. Clearly, he wouldn't give Nuwa the slightest chance. Tong Tian, this saint and you are irreconcilable. Nuwa was blocked by Tong Tian. She coldly rebuked him. The red embroidered ball in her hand smashed through the firmament and brought along a sacred light that blotted out the sky as it charged towards Tong Tian. Rumble. For a moment, the world darkened. The firmament was shattering, the stars were falling, and the boundless earth caved in millions of feet. The three saints were completely locked in battle. Yi Xian, let's go. The four celestial slaying swords were capable of slaughtering everything in the world. They were also Tongtian's strongest spiritual treasures. At this moment, he was fighting against the two sages. He let out a roar that could shatter the world, hoping that Yi Xian could take the opportunity to escape to the lower realm. Pass down this saint's decree. Whoever kills Yi Xian, this saint will bestow upon him a pre-celestial spirit treasure and even become this saint's last disciple. The heavenly sovereign of primordial beginning shouted loudly. Whoever kills Yi Xian, I will bestow upon him 3,000 scrolls. I will also owe him a favor. Nuwa continued to attack the Tong Tian with her saint techniques. At the same time, she also made a great promise to the eight forces and the presages. Following the two saints' promises, an uproar broke out. Everyone's eyes turned red and they looked at Yi Xian with a crazed expression. Everyone in the world came and went for benefits. As long as they killed Yi Xian, not only would Nuwa owe them a favor, they could also become Yuanshi Tianzuan's disciple. This was an opportunity that had never been seen before. At this moment, the great golden immortals of the eight powers, regardless of whether they were immortals or greater demons, were all looking at Yi Xian with bloodshot eyes. They even faintly surrounded Yi Xian, as if they were about to attack him in the next moment. However, the presages were not tempted by the promises made by the two saints. As presages, they knew very well that other than the opportunity to become a saint, nothing else was useful to them. Moreover, this matter wasn't something that they could participate in. If the various quasi-saints were to attack Yi Xian, they would completely offend the Grand Master of Heaven. If the Grand Master of Heaven were to settle this matter in the future, this wasn't the result that the various quasi-saints wanted. Dong Huangtai and Di Jun were silent. Although Yi Xian was their enemy, they also had their own pride. They had been completely defeated. If they went to kill Yi Xian now, their pride would not allow them to do so. Needless to say, the dozens of presages of the ancient demon court did not attack Yi Xian since the two demon emperors did not attack. Moreover, even if they wanted to kill Yi Xian, they had been severely injured by the cosmic star's formation. They had no spare energy to kill Yi Xian. Daoist Landia and Zhen Yuanzi watched silently. It was impossible for them to attack Yi Xian. As for the Emperor of Fengdu, although he wanted Yi Xian to die, he could not afford to offend the Tongtian. He could only stay out of the matter and stare at Yi Xian gloomily. The quasi-sage had the scheming of a quasi-sage, but the great golden immortals of the various powers were different. For the sake of the promise made by the two saints, they were currently looking at Yi Xian with killing intent. Go to hell. Finally, a Daluo Jinxian attacked Yi Xian. This seemed to have a chain effect. Instantly, the world rumbled. Countless Daluo Jinxian attacked Yi Xian. They even let out ferocious, murderous voices. Don't be afraid, Celestial Emperor. We're coming. At this critical moment, the roars of the demons resounded throughout the heavens and the earth. Over 1,000 grand immortal demon monarchs arrived with a rumble. They were actually the demon monarchs that had left the heavenly court in the past. Yi Tiandi, the old minister, is ashamed. Even if I die today, I will protect your life. Shen Gongbao shouted again and again. He led the immortals of the Jie school to block in front of Yi Xian. He also made the immortals of the Jie school display all kinds of great techniques and crazily charged towards the incoming golden immortals. Kill! The world was in chaos. The three saints fought from the vault of heaven to the outer heavens, and even from the outer heavens to the vault of heaven. Billions of miles of galaxies were collapsing and countless stars were exploding. Below the three saints, thousands of Daluo Jinxian were bathed in blood. The earth-shattering battle cries could shatter one's soul. Run, husband! In this chaotic battle, the Empyrean fairy kept shaking Yi Xian's arm, hoping that Yi Xian could take the opportunity to escape to the lower realms. At this moment, Yi Xian stared at the people who were fighting for him. He saw Shen Gongbao's chest being pierced by an immortal sword. He also saw the Daluo Demon King who had left in the past fighting with the Buddhas of the West. There was also the Tong Tian, who was fighting two saints alone. He was roaring at the heavens. His eyes were bloodshot. Cluck, cluck, cluck. Yi Xian clenched his teeth as if they were about to break. His eyes were blood-red and ferocious. Blue veins bulged on his forehead, as if he wanted to remember this scene in the depths of his mind. With the chaos as my witness, heaven and earth as my witness, I, Yi Xian, swear to the heavens that if I don't die today, I will settle this monstrous hatred in the future. If I violate this oath, my soul will be destroyed and I will never be reincarnated. Yi Xian roared to the sky. The bloody oath echoed between heaven and earth, causing blood-red lightning to appear in billions of miles of heaven and earth. There were loud explosions in all directions, as if they were witnessing Yi Xian's oath. Time seemed to stop, space seemed to be frozen, heaven and earth seemed to be stagnant, and all things were wailing. When Yi Xian's blood oath echoed between heaven and earth, an extremely palpitating feeling grew in the hearts of all forces, causing their expressions to change and extreme fear to appear in their eyes. Run! It was a simple word, but it brought great humiliation to Yi Xian. He suddenly turned around and fled toward the Earth Immortal world. This was because Yi Xian knew that as long as he left this place alive, this world-shaking battle would disappear. When he passed the three tribulations of the heavenly Tao in the future, all the grievances today would be repaid in the future. Chapter 784. Dong Huang Tai, stop him! Nuwa shouted angrily in the sky. At this moment, only Dong Huang Tai and Emperor Jun could stop Yi Xian. However, the two demonic emperors were hesitant, not knowing whether they should stop Yi Xian or not. Puff! Suddenly, Dong Huang Tai spat out a mouthful of essence blood and fainted on the ground. What was even more strange was that Emperor Jun's body was covered in cracks, and a large amount of blood gushed out from all parts of his body. He was also unconscious at this moment. Yi Xian, although you are the enemy of the two of us, we brothers disdain to hit you when you're down. Quickly run away. Dong Huang Tai's voice sounded in Yi Xian's ears. Brother Yi, you are the only one I admire except for my brother Dong Huang. Don't die in the hands of a saint. When we fight in the future, I will definitely wash away the shame of being defeated by you today, Emperor Jun said coldly with a sound transmission. Obviously, the two demonic emperors were pretending to faint. After all, they were seriously injured before. At this moment, they were pretending to be unconscious in front of Nuwa. As the saints' will was irreversible, they could not directly go against it. Therefore, they had to resort to this. Dong Huang, Emperor Jun. Yi Xian was stunned. He took a deep look at the two demonic emperors, and a complicated look appeared in his eyes. Then, he activated what little cultivation he had left and was about to escape to the mortal world. You want to leave? Rumble. Heaven and earth exploded, and Tao light covered the sky. The three pure ones were indeed the three pure ones. Yuanshi Tianzuan was too terrifying. He had been watching Yi Xian's every move. When he saw Yi Xian was about to escape to the mortal world, he took the opportunity to attack Yi Xian with a saint's grand skill. How dare you! Tong Tian shouted coldly, and his eyes were filled with anxiety. He did not expect Yuanshi Tianzuan to ignore his own safety and kill Yi Xian even if he had to take his attack. Qi! A ray of Tao light pierced through the sky and descended towards Yi Xian. However, the Tong Tian was unable to save Yi Xian at this moment. Yi Xian was about to be killed on the spot. Am I going to die? Yi Xian was locked in place by the saint's great art. At this moment, he couldn't even move a finger. He could only watch as the saint's great art descended upon him. His eyes were filled with unwillingness and despair. Suddenly, a strand of darkness silently arose at this critical moment. An obscure fluctuation caused the heavens and the earth to freeze, and it silently obstructed Yi Xian's path. Wang! The void was destroyed without a single ripple. The great technique of the heavenly sovereign of primordial beginning strangely dissipated. It was also at this moment that Yi Xian's body could finally move. However, he was completely stunned on the spot. How dare you? Who are you? Yuanshi Tianzuan's expression changed drastically. An extremely terrifying sacred light of the heavens and the earth spread out. A pair of Dharma eyes of heaven and earth illuminated the three realms. He wanted to find the person who had saved Yi Xian's life. Just a little bit, just a little bit. If this strange black light had not blocked the attack for Yi Xian would have already died at the hands of Yuanshi Tianzuan. However, Yuanshi Tianzuan's heart was extremely heavy. This was because he deeply understood that he was one of the three pure ones. Apart from saints, no one could block his attack. However, he had never seen the power that blocked the attack for Yi Xian. It was definitely not from the other five saints. This was because this aura was extremely mysterious. It did not exist in the three realms at all. At this moment, let alone Yuanshi Tianzuan, even Nuwa and Tong Tian were shocked. The two of them were saints, so they were sensitive to auras. The aura that had flashed by earlier was strange and unfathomable, so how could the two of them not have sensed it? How is this possible? Nuwa murmured in surprise. Her heart was extremely heavy. Was there really someone in the three realms who could rival saints? When she thought of this, Nuwa no longer remained composed. She suddenly looked at Yi Xian, as she had thought of something extremely terrifying. Don't tell me it's him. Nuwa cried out in shock. Even her eyes became extremely frozen, as she had never forgotten a figure that seemed to defy the flow of time back in Nuwa Palace. It was also because of this person's appearance that Yi Xian had survived from the myriad poison ancestor. The world froze, and everything fell silent. Yi Xian seemed to have turned into a statue. Right now, he did not speak or move at all. He even seemed to have forgotten about fleeing to the lower world. However, from his clenched fists and trembling body, it was possible to tell just how turbulent his mind was right now. The undying immortal scripture, the undying immortal scripture. It's him. It must be him. The exact same aura. The exact same techniques. Yuan Ling. Yuan Ling, get out here. Suddenly, Yi Xian's sluggish expression quickly dissipated. He looked around him and roared. His blood-red eyes were even more mournful and malevolent, as if he wanted to find the location of his origin spirit. After spending 4 years together on the battlefield of the Blood Sea, Yi Xian was far too familiar with Yuanling's aura. He was so familiar with it that he had not forgotten it even after over 100,000 years. It was like something that had been carved into his bones. Yi Xian told himself that his senses were not wrong. The black light that had just blocked Yuanshi Tianzuan's fatal attack was Yuanling's. The only difference was that Yuanling only had the cultivation of a primordial unity Xian Immortal on the battlefield of the Blood Sea. However, the aura that flashed by just now was thousands of times stronger than the aura that Yuanling had released back then. Although the power had changed, the aura was exactly the same. Yi Xian was absolutely sure that his senses were not wrong. The person who had saved him was Yuanling. Yi Xian searched for Yuanling like a madman. Unfortunately, he could not find any trace of Yuanling at all. At this moment, the 3 sages were all looking at Yi Xian. Although they did not know who Yuanling was, Yi Xian's crazed appearance clearly showed that the person who had saved him was closely related to Yi Xian. No matter who you are, Yi Xian, this evil creature, will definitely die today. Yuanshi Tianzuan shouted coldly. He did not believe that there was anyone in this world who could rival them other than the 6 sages. Evil creature, die. Yuanshi Tianzuan attacked Yi Xian again. Nuwa also shot a beam of holy light at Yi Xian with a cold expression. Obviously, with 2 sages present, no one could stop their determination to kill Yi Xian. You want to kill him? Have you asked for my permission? Tong Tian had already miscalculated once and almost caused Yi Xian to die at the hands of Yuanshi Tianzuan. How could he let the same thing happen again? Rumble. The whole hall was filled with white light and killing intent. Tong Tian shot out a green light formation diagram. The 3 realms shook violently, and the cries of billions of souls could be heard in the void. Buzz. The 4 immortal slaying swords. The first was immortal exterminating, the second was immortal trapping, the third was immortal slaughtering, and the fourth was immortal slaying. The heavenly Tao killing weapon was unparalleled. When the 4 immortal slaying swords released heavenly Tao killing light, an extremely terrifying aura swept through the 3 realms and resonated with the green light formation diagram in the sky. Immortal slaying sword formation. Yuanshi Tianzuan roared in shock. He stared at Tong Tian with extreme horror in his eyes. Senior brother Tong Tian, are you crazy? You actually used the immortal slaying sword formation to protect an ant like Yi Xian? Nuwa rebuked angrily with panic in her eyes. It was not that Nuwa was afraid of the immortal slaying sword formation. Even if Tong Tian could not kill the 2 sages with the immortal slaying sword formation, the immortal slaying sword formation could penetrate the heaven and earth. The immortal slaying sword formation was the cause of the immortal slaying sword formation in the past, and it also drew out Tao ancestor Hung Jun who had merged with the Tao. What happened in the past was about to happen again. If Tao ancestor Hung Jun came out and punished the sages, how could Nuwa bear the consequences? How could Nuwa and Yuanshi Tianzuan not be afraid? Chapter 785. The fairy-slaying sword formation could destroy heaven and earth. The murderous aura of the 4 great swords was rampant. Once the fairy-slaying sword formation was activated, even a sage would not be able to escape for a while. It had the ferocious power to destroy heaven and earth. During the investiture of the gods' war, Tong Tian relied on the fairy-slaying sword formation to fight against the 4 sages. Although the formation was destroyed and he left the Aquamarine Palace in the end, it was a glorious defeat. It also made Tongtian's name resound between heaven and earth. Rumble. When the heavens released murderous aura, the stars changed. When the earth released murderous aura, dragons and snakes rose from the land. When the man released murderous aura, heaven and earth were turned upside down. The fairy-slaying sword formation was the #1 killing weapon of the way of heaven. When the 4 swords were activated together, they could destroy both the past and the present. This was not just a saying. It had a terrifying power that could frighten even gods and ghosts. Nuwa and Yuanshi looked solemn. The various forces had already stopped fighting. Everyone looked at Tong Tian with horror in their eyes. It was because if the fairy-slaying sword formation was really activated, no one present could escape. The only outcome was death. How could this not make them feel terrified? Junior brother, are you really going to disregard everything for this evil creature? Yuanshi Tianzuan rebuked in a cold voice. No one can kill the person that I, Tong Tian, want to protect. This simple sentence clearly stated Tong Tian's intention. The immortal slaying sword formation rumbled and rotated in the firmament. The murderous intent of the heavenly Tao that poured down was simply shocking, further proving that Tong Tian was not just saying it for fun. Junior sister, why don't we? Yuanshi Tianzuan frowned. Obviously, he had the intention to retreat. If a battle between sages really started for Yi Xian, the consequences would be unimaginable. Senior brother Yuanshi, if this boy doesn't die, he will become a great threat to us in the future. Nuwa didn't hesitate at all, and decisively rejected Yuanshi Tianzuan's proposal. The senses of a sage were too sensitive. Yi Xian had always been in a desperate situation and had even reached the sage-to-be realm. If this continued for a long time, it was not impossible for him to become a sage. Moreover, Yi Xian had long become a knot in Nuwa's heart. If she did not kill him, how could Nuwa be at ease? Tong Tian, since you are not afraid of provoking Master Hong Jun, I will fight you to the death today. Nuwa had already thrown caution to the wind. Yi Xian must die today. Even if the Tong Tian activated the immortal slaying sword array, she would not retreat in the slightest. Then I will grant you your wish. Tong Tian was indifferent and emotionless. His robe exploded, and the killing holy light of Tong Tian spread out. The immortal slaying sword array rumbled and rotated. The four great killing swords emitted sword radiance that could destroy the world. Heaven and earth stagnated, and time froze. Spatial cracks appeared between heaven and earth. The rotation of the immortal slaying sword array became more and more terrifying, and gradually distorted the heaven and earth of the three realms, as if the world was about to collapse. Taoist Tong Tian, please wait a moment. Suddenly, at this critical moment, two figures strolled over from the west. The sky was filled with golden lotuses blooming in the void, and an extremely grand chanting of sutras could be heard. The holy light of heaven and earth rippled. A bamboo pole quietly lay between heaven and earth, and also stopped the immortal slaying sword array from pouring out the heavenly Tao's killing intent. The wonderful tree of seven treasures, the most sacred object of Buddhism, could wipe out all things in the world. When this object appeared between heaven and earth, Tong Tian's expression changed, while Nuwa and Yuanshi were extremely surprised. Xuanti's guidance. Tong Tian enunciated each word clearly. His eyes were extremely gloomy, and his brows were tightly knitted together. The two sages of the West floated over without a trace of dust or killing intent. Although the two sages were dressed in Taoist attire, they were the founders of Western Buddhism. Yi Xian, when I activate the immortal slaying sword array to trap the four of them, you should quickly escape to the lower realm. Remember, before you become a sage, you must never reveal your true body. Tong Tian stood proudly in the sky, but he was secretly transmitting his voice to Yi Xian. This was because Tong Tian did not need to ask the two sages of the West's intentions. They were definitely on Nuwa and Yuanshi's side. Greetings, senior brothers and sisters. Xuanti smiled and nodded, giving off a feeling of a spring breeze. The two sages of the West had listened to Tao in the Purple Cloud Palace in the past and were accepted as nominal disciples by ancestor Hong Jun. In terms of seniority, they were naturally inferior to Three Pure Ones and Nuwa. This was also the reason why they addressed the three sages as senior brothers and sisters. Junior brothers, please help me break this immortal slaying sword array. Nuwa expressed her thoughts directly without any nonsense. This was because she knew that Yi Xian had almost destroyed Spirited Mountain and had a great grudge against Western Buddhism. Senior sister, please calm down. Xuanti put his palms together and smiled. Then he looked at Tang Tian and said, Senior brother Tang Tian, the catastrophe of heaven and earth was born because of Yi Xian. Senior brother Tang Tian, please understand right and wrong. Let the two of us return to the Bodhi tree and reflect on our mistakes until the hostility in his chest is worn out. This is a great merit and great fortune. Xuanti, you. Hearing Xuanti's words, Nua's expression changed. She did not expect that the two sages of the West had not come here to kill Yi Xian, but to take Yi Xian back to the Western paradise. The words of the sages were not false. Since Xuanti said to reflect on his mistakes, Yi Xian's life would not be in danger. However, it was clear that the two sages of the West had other plans. It was definitely not that simple. You want to take Yi Xian away? Tongtian's expression froze and then instantly became gloomy. He did not believe that the two sages of the West would be so kind. There must be some conspiracy behind this. If senior brother Tang Tian does not allow it, then the two of us can only stand on senior sister Nua's side. Xuanti let out a long sigh. Taking advantage of a crisis, brazenly taking advantage of a crisis. It was almost the same trick as the apatheicized war of the past. The apatheicized war of the past was a battle between the Chan school and the Jie school, but the biggest beneficiaries were the two sages of the West. If Yuanshi Tianzuan had not invited the two sages of the West to break the immortal slaying sword formation together, Western Buddhism would not have been able to prosper after the apatheicized war. How similar was the scene today to that of the past? The two sages of the West were once again taking advantage of a crisis, but the only difference was that their purpose this time was to take Yi Xian away. Xuanti, are you threatening me? Tongtian's aura was cold and sharp, and wisps of heaven ways killing intent filled the air. Senior brother Tang Tian, don't be angry. The Taoist priest smiled and looked at Yi Xian. He nodded kindly at him and said, Little friend Yi Xian, you saw what happened today. Senior brother Tang Tian fought two fellow disciples for you, but you killed too many people. Do you really want to see senior brother Tang Tian fight to the death with us? Looking at the kind smile on Xuanti's face, Yi Xian was expressionless. No one knew what he was thinking, but Yi Xian's lips curved into a self-mocking smile. Yi Xian was not a 3-year-old child. He understood everything in front of him. Tang Tian was indeed very strong. With the immortal slaying sword formation in his hands, even if Yuanshi Tianzuan and Nua joined forces, they would not be able to do anything to Tang Tian. However, with the arrival of the two sages of the West, everything had changed. If the two sages of the West joined forces with Yuanshi and Nua, even the immortal slaying sword formation could be broken. At that time, he would definitely die. Even if Tang Tian wanted to protect him, it would be useless. Chapter 786. The four sages were too terrifying. No matter how strong Tang Tian was, there was a limit to his strength. Tang Tian was only relying on the sword formation and his cultivation was only on par with Yuanshi Tianzuan's. Yi Xian laughed. He really laughed, but it was a contemptuous laugh. He was laughing at Nua and Yuanshi. When the two sages of the West appeared, Yi Xian understood that everything was under their control. Even Nua and Yuanshi had been tricked. The two sages of the West's goal was simple. They wanted to take him away. At this critical moment, the two sages of the West were the key to Yi Xian's survival. To put it bluntly, if Yi Xian didn't agree to leave with the two sages of the West, the two sages of the West would help Nua and Yuanshi break the sword formation. At that time, Yi Xian would die without a doubt. If Yi Xian left with the two sages of the West, Nua and Yuanshi wouldn't be able to stop them. This was because there was still Tang Tian protecting Yi Xian. This would also allow the two sages of the West to form an alliance with the Tang Tian. Therefore, the two sages of the West would benefit the most. Whether Yi Xian died or left with the two sages of the West, it would be beneficial for the two sages of the West. At this moment, Yi Xian wasn't the only one who understood the crux of the matter. Nuwa and Yuanshi weren't fools either. They immediately understood the current situation. This caused their faces to darken. They looked at the two sages of the West with extreme hostility. "All right, I'm willing to go with you." Suddenly, Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. He finally agreed to the two sages of the West. "You can't." Tong Tian scolded coldly. He knew very well that if Yi Xian went with the two sages of the West, even if he didn't die, Yi Xian's fate wouldn't be any better. The two sages of the West were the most skilled at scheming. Among the 6 sages, they were the most shameless. In the past, when the Purple Cloud Palace heard about the Tao, they cried loudly. That was why they were accepted as disciples of the Hengjun Tao and received two sages. The great was the two sages of the West were shameless. To survive the Great Tribulation, Tong Tian wouldn't believe that the two sages of the West had of the 4 sages. Tong Tian wouldn't believe that the two sages of the West had of the sages of the West of the West. To the sages of the sages of the sages of the sages of the sages, I, to gods to. On I. You don't know. Ah. Tong Tian's face was gloomy and uncertain. His words came to an abrupt end. In the end, he could only sigh helplessly. Tong Tian also knew the situation in front of him. He also knew what Yi Xian was thinking. He was angry that he couldn't protect Yi Xian. The matter was very clear. If Yi Xian didn't go with the two sages of the West, he would definitely die today. If he went with the two sages of the West, he might have a chance to live. But this chance was too slim. Zhuan Ti was very cunning and had the cultivation of a sage. How could Yi Xian find a chance to live in the hands of the two sages of the West? Well, you go with them. But I promise you that if anyone dares to kill you, I won't hesitate to destroy the 3 realms of heaven, earth, and man, Tong Tian roared coldly. He seemed to be making a promise to Yi Xian, but in fact, he was warning Zhuan Ti. Zhuan Ti. Suddenly, Nua's breath was extremely cold, as if a cold wind was blowing. But the two sages of the West didn't feel anything. They just smiled at Nua and Yuanshi. Although Yi Xian has caused chaos in the 3 realms, the purpose of Buddhism is to help people to do good. I hope you can understand right and wrong, Zhuan Ti said with a smile. You. Nua said hatefully. The holy light of heaven and earth exploded in the sky. But in the end, she didn't attack the two sages of the West. She knew very well that Tong Tian was extremely difficult to deal with. With the two sages of the West, she and Yuanshi couldn't do anything. Yi Xian couldn't die here today. Well, I'll remember what happened today, Nua said hatefully. She took a deep look at Yi Xian, then flicked her sleeves and disappeared. Junior brothers, I hope you'll know what happened today. I'll remember what happened today. The Heavenly Lord of the Origin's expression was extremely ugly. He was one of the 3 pristines, but today, he had become the bride of the two sages of the West. This had already made him extremely ashamed and angry, but he could only suffer in silence and swallow this bitter fruit. Buzz! The void disappeared, the light of the way dissipated, and Yuanshi Tianzuan disappeared. But today, the two sages of the West had thoroughly offended the two sages. This was karma between sages, and they would definitely settle today's matter in the future. From this, it could be seen that the two sages of the West had paid such a high price to take Yi Xian away. There must be something hidden in this, but no one knew what the two sages of the West's purpose was. Yi Xian, if you have anything else to say it as soon as possible. From now on, you will follow us and reflect on your mistakes. When the anger in your chest dissipates, you can return to the 3 realms, Zhuan Ti said gently. Yi Xian. Heaven Emperor. A worthy younger brother. The 3 sages to be of the celestial court, the Empyrean fairy, the troops of the celestial court, Shen Gongbao, and the other immortals of the sect of Jia, all surrounded Yi Xian at this moment. They looked at Yi Xian with heavy eyes. You don't have to worry about me. I'm just going to stay in the Western Paradise for a while. During my absence, the celestial court will disappear. If there comes a day when we meet again, the celestial court will reappear in the world, Yi Xian said with a smile. A worthy younger brother, you can't go with them. You have to know that the 2 sages of the West. Kang Xian's expression was heavy as he secretly transmitted a message to Yi Xian. Because Kang Xian was once the Mahamayuri of Spirited Mountain, he knew the temperament of the 2 sages of the West too well. Although they were sages, they were shameless and could do anything. If Yi Xian went, they would probably never see each other again. Brother, you don't have to say much. You know that I have no choice. Yi Xian slowly shook his head. How could he not know the danger involved? It was just that he had no other choice. I'll be gone for years. There will be no time for regrets. Take care, everyone. Yi Xian took a deep look at the people of the celestial court. A bright smile appeared on his face, and he suddenly turned and walked toward the 2 sages of the West. Great! The 2 sages of the West smiled. Golden auspicious clouds rose under their feet, and the sound of Buddhist chanting could be heard in the void. Golden lotuses bloomed all over the sky, and the 2 sages of the West disappeared with Yi Xian. The wind swept away the clouds, and in the universe, billions of stars twinkled in the sun. The boundless sea of stars bobbed up and down. The hole in the sky could not be healed, and it caused an endless catastrophe to the Earth immortal world. However, everyone had already forgotten about this scene. In their eyes, Yi Xian's figure was lonely and bleak. It was as if this parting was forever, and they would never see each other again. Chapter 787. The Western Pure Land. In the eyes of mortals, the so-called Western Pure Land was the great thunderclap temple of Spirited Mountain. However, the reality was that the Western Pure Land was the place where the 2 sages of the West lived. Opening up the void and creating a world were unique to the sages. However, the world created by the sages was also included in the 3 realms. If the outside world was destroyed, the world created by the sages would also vanish. To put it bluntly, becoming a sage through merit was a gift from the heavenly way. Even the sages had to rely on the heavens and earth to be born, let alone the world created by the sages. Whoosh, golden waves rose and fell in the boundless golden sea of bitterness. Spirited mountains and blessed lands stood on both sides of the sea of bitterness. The golden light of Buddha illuminated the boundless void. Golden lotuses could be seen blooming in the waves of the sea of bitterness from time to time. A bamboo raft moved with the waves. It seemed to be drifting in the sea of bitterness, but it was as steady as Mount Tai as it moved forward in the waves. On the bamboo raft, the 2 sages of the West smiled. The light of Buddha lingered around them. Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the bamboo raft with his eyes closed. Wisps of chaotic divine light lingered around him. It was obvious that he was healing his injuries. The sea of bitterness is boundless. Turn back and you'll see the shore. However, if you cross the sea of bitterness, you'll see the shore of light. Just like you, little friend Yi, you should let go of your killing intent and focus on practicing Buddhism with us, Jane said with a smile. Yi Xian slowly opened his eyes. He looked calmly at the boundless water and asked in a hoarse voice, "What is Buddha?" Delivering all living beings and helping them to do good. This is Buddha. Xuanti put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. He gave Yi Xian a so-called answer. Then do the 2 of you think you're Buddha? Yi Xian raised his eyes to look at the 2 saints of the West as a mocking smile appeared on his face. Looking at Yi Xian's mocking expression, the 2 Western saints didn't feel any anger. Instead, they said with a kind expression, the two of us founded Buddhism to benefit all living things. If you think that the two of us are Buddhas, then we are Buddhas. If you are Buddhas, then what am I? Devil? Yi Xian asked in a hoarse voice. Along the way, the two sages of the West had been constantly instilling Buddhist ideals into him. However, Yi Xian had ignored the two of them. It was only when they entered the Western Pure Land that Yi Xian finally spoke. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha immediately. Even a devil can become a Buddha, Kundi said softly. Xuanti, according to what you said, as long as the devil is willing to lay down his butcher's knife, he can become a Buddha. But why can't those who are wholeheartedly good become Buddhas? Yi Xian smiled. Hearing Yi Xian's words, Kundi's breath was slightly stifled. What is Buddha? What is a devil? It's just a one-sided statement from the two of you. In this world, only great power is fundamental. The weak can only act according to the rules of the strong. For example, I, Yi Xian, am not as strong as the two of you. You can call me a devil because the weak have no right to speak. This is the essence of this world. The so-called Buddha and devil are just a big joke. The strong are as heavy as a mountain and the weak crawl like a dog. Isn't this the truth? Yi Xian's smile was no longer there. His voice was still hoarse, but his face was ferocious and sinister. He looked at the two sages of the West with blatant contempt. How dare you? Kundi's smile was no longer there. He looked like a Buddhist Vajra with angry eyes. His terrible holy might set off waves of the bitter sea, turning the golden bitter sea suddenly as dark as ink. It seems that I have exposed your hypocrisy and made you angry. Ha! Yi Xian laughed wildly. His laughter contained great sarcasm, and he did not care about the terrible holy might that Kundi was releasing. Junior brother, you are thinking too much. Jane frowned. A breeze blew across the bitter sea, and Kundi's anger disappeared quietly. Kindness appeared on his face again. He put his palms together and said, "Thank you for your advice, senior brother. I am ashamed. Little friend Yi, you are right. This world is indeed full of strong people, but we Buddhists have always been good. We have the 7 pure rules to restrain ourselves. We also slay demons and devils to save all living beings in the 3 realms. We also make all living beings revere our Buddhism from the bottom of their hearts. This is not achieved just because of power." Jane spoke tirelessly, chanting the name of Buddha in a low voice. He was promoting the purpose of Buddhism to save people and do good. Ha! A sneer appeared on the corner of Yi Xian's mouth as he looked at the 2 Western saints with disdain once again. Then let me ask you. If there were no demons in this world, there would be no Buddha's mercy. Then what is the use of Buddhism? At the beginning of the world, the clear air rose to the sky and the turbid air sank to the earth. This world was divided into yin and yang. The sun rose to yang and the moon fell to yin. All living beings were divided into men and women. All living beings in this world were separated into yang and yin. Even the orthodoxies between heaven and earth were divided into good and evil. All living beings coexisted with each other. You don't even understand this principle and want to instill the so-called essence of Buddhism into me. Isn't that a joke? Yi Xian was eloquent and eloquent. Jane's kind face gradually disappeared. His face was extremely gloomy, and he could not refute. It was not that they did not understand Yi Xian's point of view. Truly speaking, this was the way of heaven and earth. However, to them, Buddhists, this was simply absurd. If these words were allowed to circulate in Buddhism, it would definitely cause a great disaster. The 2 sages of the West finally stopped talking and stopped talking to Yi Xian. Obviously, the 2 of them also realized that continuing to talk to Yi Xian would only make them angry. Before they could convert Yi Xian, their own dharma and way would be disrupted by Yi Xian. Yi Xian sneered as he watched the two Western saints remain silent. He closed his eyes and sat cross-legged once more. However, Yi Xian's eyes were extremely heavy. It was obvious that he wasn't as calm and complacent as he appeared on the surface. Yi Xian had never cared to argue. Although he seemed to have won the debate with the two sages of the West, it was of no use to him. Cultivation, strength, these were the foundation. Everything else was but an illusion. Moreover, Yi Xian knew very well that at this moment, he had fallen into the hands of the two sages of the West. What awaited him was definitely not a good thing. Even if he wanted to escape from the two sages of the West, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens. Who could save the two sages? This was simply a deadlock. Yi Xian could not break out of this deadlock. Unless he could pass the three tribulations of the way of heaven and possess a cultivation comparable to that of a sage, or if Tao ancestor Hung Jun appeared, he could regain his freedom. However, these two methods were simply impossible to achieve. At this moment, he was only a sage to be. The first tribulation of the way of heaven had yet to descend, let alone pass the three tribulations of the way of heaven and possess a cultivation comparable to that of a sage. As for Tao ancestor Hung Jun, he was extremely mysterious. In the past, he had almost destroyed Yi Xian's path of Tao through strength. How could he appear and rescue Yi Xian from the two sages of the West? This was simply a fantasy. Chapter 788. Now, Yi Xian could only save himself. There was no other way. However, no matter how hard Yi Xian racked his brains, he could not think of a way to escape from the control of the two sages of the West. Not to mention that he was now seriously injured and his cultivation had fallen to the bottom. Even if he was at his peak, he was just an ant in front of the two sages of the West. There was no way he could resist at all. Since he could not think of a way to break out, Yi Xian did not think about it anymore. He could only heal his injuries as soon as possible and restore himself to his peak. This was the only thing he could do at the moment. Whoosh, the waves of the Sea of Bitterness were turbulent. The bamboo raft moved along with the current. After 3 days, the boundless Sea of Bitterness finally changed. A Tongtian mountain range appeared at the end of the Sea of Bitterness. The mountains rose and fell one after another. Golden Buddha's light shone among the mountains. Judging from its appearance, it was tens of thousands of miles wide. In the middle of the mountains, there was a giant peak that pierced the sky. A large number of Buddhist scriptures were inscribed on the thick mountain. The rumbling sound of Buddhist scriptures came from the void of the heavens, giving people a sense of boundless grandeur and a sense of reverence. Come! Kundi flicked his sleeves and the bamboo raft under his feet turned into a golden decree. It directly carried the three of them toward the giant peak that pierced the sky and made them disappear into the Sea of Bitterness. Primordial Mountain. A golden stone tablet stood on the giant peak that pierced the sky. 2 golden Buddhist scriptures were inscribed on the stone tablet. This was the Taoist field of the two sages of the West. At the beginning of the Yuan, all Buddhas were born. At the beginning of the chaos, Yin and Yang were divided. This was the origin of the mountain's name. At the peak of Primordial Mountain, the Buddha's light shone. A Bodhi tree was rooted on it. Under the Bodhi tree, there was a misty spiritual pond. The pond water shone with golden light and was full of Buddhist aura. When one breathed in, it gave people the feeling of ascending to immortality. Little friend Yi, this is our Taoist field. This tree is the root of all Taoism and is also the place where we achieve Taoism. The spirit pool behind us is called the Myriad Buddha Spirit Pool. Not only can it heal your injuries, but it can also improve your cultivation. Kundi was holding the tree of 7 wonders and introducing it to Yi Xian with a smile. Cultivate your body and mind, grind away the murderous aura in your heart. As long as little friend Yi is wholeheartedly kind, the two of us will definitely let little friend Yi go. We won't stop you in the slightest, Jia Yin and Shan said. Without waiting for Yi Xian's reply, the two of them sat cross-legged under the Bodhi tree. As the Buddha's light shone in front of the two of them, a black chessboard appeared. They actually chose to ignore Yi Xian and started to play. Such a scene stunned Yi Xian on the spot. He had thought that the two of them would definitely reveal their purpose in coming to the training hall of the two Western sages, but what Yi Xian saw at this moment made him feel bewildered. No, it's definitely not right. There must be something that I don't know about. Yi Xian instantly became alert and stared at the two Western sages. He did not believe that the two of them did not have any purpose for him, let alone being so kind to him. They really just wanted to teach him to do good. Yi Xian clearly remembered that the two Western sages did not hesitate to offend Nuwa and Yuanshi Tianzuan in order to take him away. This was karma between sages, and it could be said that the two Western sages had paid a great price. The two of them had paid such a great price just to bring him here to grind away his murderous aura. Yi Xian would never believe such a ridiculous thing. What exactly were the two Western sages planning? Yi Xian kept asking himself in his heart, but he could not find the answer he wanted. This also made his eyes gloomy, but he could not open his mouth to test the two of them. Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool. Yi Xian glanced at the pool behind the Bodhi tree. He could completely feel that the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool was filled with an extremely large amount of spiritual energy. It was indeed a timely help for his current injuries. Forget it, I'll heal my injuries first. I want to see what the two Western sages are after. Yi Xian thought of this and strode towards the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool. When he heard the sound of splashing water, Yi Xian also sat cross-legged in the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool and began to heal his injuries frantically. Rumble. The Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool was indeed miraculous. The spiritual energy was terrifyingly viscous. It surged madly into Yi Xian's body and healed his injuries at an extremely fast speed. As the saying went, those who were barefooted were not afraid of those who were wearing shoes. Yi Xian had already come this far, so he simply did not care about the dangers of the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool. If the two Western sages wanted to kill him, they would not have to go through so much trouble. Devouring the spiritual energy of the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool, Yi Xian's origin immortal body glowed, and his cracked body gradually healed. Even the indestructible true spirit in his sea of consciousness was rapidly rotating. Everything was progressing in a good direction. Swish! Swish! The Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool was truly miraculous, and it was worthy of being the spiritual pool of the two Western sages. No matter how Yi Xian absorbed the spiritual energy, the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool seemed endless. Comfortable, extremely comfortable. As Yi Xian greedily devoured the energy of the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool, his injuries rapidly healed. Day after day, year after year, time passed very quickly. Yi Xian stayed in the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool for a full 3,000 years, and finally, after 3,100 years, his injuries were completely healed. 3,000 years was an unimaginable number for mortals, but to Yi Xian, it was only a blink of an eye. It took him more than 3,000 years to recover from his injuries. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the injuries Yi Xian suffered were. As the saying went, fortune and misfortune depended on each other, and fortune and misfortune lurked within. If the two Western sages had not brought Yi Xian here, even if he had been able to escape from Nuwa and Yuanshi to the lower realm, it would have taken an unimaginable amount of time to heal his injuries. It would have taken tens of thousands of years at the very least. In for a penny, in for a pound. Although his injuries had been healed and Yi Xian had finally returned to his prime, the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool was indeed miraculous and filled with endless spiritual energy. Yi Xian naturally would not give up such a good opportunity. He would definitely make good use of the Myriad Buddha Spiritual Pool to improve his cultivation. Swish! 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 Yi Xian frantically absorbed the golden spiritual energy. He constantly refined the spiritual energy for his own use. Yi Xian could also feel that his cultivation was slowly increasing. Although the increase was extremely subtle, it did have a significant effect. This also made Yi Xian extremely excited. However, Yi Xian did not see that the two Western sages, who were under the Bodhi tree, had a mysterious smile on their lips, as if everything was under their control. The sages' thoughts were uncertain, and the will of the sages could not be defied. In the Yuan Mountain, which was the Tao field of the two Western sages, everything would not be so simple. Although Yi Xian did not see the mysterious smile on the two Western sages' faces, he was always on guard against them. However, Yi Xian also knew that the two Western sages would not be so simple. There would come a day when they would bare their fangs, and all he could do was wait. Yes, he could only wait. To deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo, this was Yi Xian's only way. Chapter 789. No. It still didn't work. Why was it like this? Yi Xian sat cross-legged in the middle of the 10,000 Buddha spirit pond as endless golden spiritual energy poured into his body. This state had already lasted for a full 5,000 years, but his own cultivation had long since stagnated and didn't advance at all. In the past, Yi Xian had successfully entered the sage-to-be realm after bathing in the blood of the ancestral dragon and completing the Daoyuo immortal body. Because he walked the path of proving the Tao through strength, he was considered a top figure among the sage-to-be. Even the two demon emperors had been defeated by him. However, the path of the sage-to-be had just begun. This was not the end of Yi Xian's journey, but his beginning. Proving the Tao through strength and overcoming the 9 tribulations of the heavenly Tao was the path Yi Xian had to take in the sage-to-be realm. Yi Xian also understood this very well. After overcoming the 3 tribulations of the heavenly Tao, one's cultivation would be comparable to a saint's. Yi Xian knew this very well. However, he had not even experienced the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, let alone possess the combat strength of a saint. Shackles, an insurmountable shackle. Yi Xian felt that blindly cultivating was useless. No matter how much spiritual qi there was, it could not improve his cultivation. Yi Xian had a feeling that if he wanted to break through the shackles in front of him, he had to overcome the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao. Only then could his cultivation improve by leaps and bounds. However, a very funny thing happened. Yi Xian did not sense the first tribulation of the heavenly Tao, let alone break through the shackles in front of him. The path of proving the Tao through strength was not tolerated by the heavenly Tao. Yi Xian understood this very well. He also knew that it was not as easy to overcome the 9 tribulations of the heavenly Tao. However, if his cultivation remained stagnant, when could he kill Nuwa and Yuanshi? Yi Xian could only put this matter aside for the time being, because he was now in the Taoist temple of the two sages of the West. He did not know what dangers were waiting for him. Yi Xian emerged from the water and walked out of the myriad Buddha spiritual pond. His body was bathed in dazzling golden light as he looked at the two saints of the West. The two sages of the West were gentle and silent. They were playing chess under the Bodhi tree and had not done anything else since the beginning. However, Yi Xian knew very well that he had been cultivating in the myriad Buddha spiritual pool for 8,000 years, but the two of them had not done anything strange. This made Yi Xian even more vigilant. Little friend, congratulations on your recovery. Suddenly, Zhuan-Ti looked up at Yi Xian and nodded at him with a smile. Then, he focused on playing chess with Jia-yin. Tap, tap, tap. Yi Xian narrowed his eyes and walked slowly towards the Bodhi tree. He stopped in front of the two and looked at the black and white chessboard in front of them. When Yi Xian saw the black and white chessboard, his eyes were slightly stunned. Then, his brows suddenly knitted together, and there was a look of surprise in his eyes. The black and white chessboard was very strange. The black and white sides only surrounded each other but did not attack. The small chessboard was full of black and white chess pieces. Obviously, the game had reached its final moment. Yi Xian was conceited. He was also a master in chess and was proficient in all four arts. The black and white sides on the chessboard were evenly matched. At the moment, there were not many places for them to place their pieces. Every piece could determine the outcome of the game. Little friend, you know chess too. Jia Yin suddenly looked up with a kind smile on his face. I know a little. Yi Xian nodded and said. Little friend, who do you think will win and who will lose in this game? Jia Yin asked with a smile. They are evenly matched. Both sides want to defeat the other in one move. Unfortunately, it is only a draw in the end. Yi Xian answered truthfully. Little friend, you are wrong. We are not playing chess, but the general trend of heaven and earth. How about you take a closer look? Zhuan Ti smiled mysteriously. Yi Xian frowned and looked at the black and white chessboard again. However, at this moment, something strange happened. The black and white chessboard suddenly burst out with a bright Buddha's light. Yi Xian's consciousness was suddenly in a trance. Boom! This was a vast and boundless space. There was no up or down, no 8 directions. There was only the sea of Buddha and the golden lotus. There was also the Buddha's light shining all over the sky. There was also the sound of chanting. Swoosh! The golden light covered the sky and the earth. A big swastika appeared and kept rotating above Yi Xian's head. There was also the sound of chanting. At this moment, Yi Xian opened his eyes in a daze. When he saw everything in front of him, his expression changed because he knew that the two sages of the West had finally made a move on him. Black gas lingered and the devil light surged. Yi Xian seemed to have become an anomaly in this Buddhist space. The Buddha's light shone in all directions, and he was the only anomaly in this place. You want to convert me? Yi Xian muttered to himself coldly. The swastika above his head was pouring the auspicious Buddha's light on him. It was constantly obliterating the devil light and evil qi around him, giving him a sense of dizziness. The great Tao of heaven and earth, Buddhism descends into the world. The sea of suffering saves all living beings. The golden lotus gives birth to new life. Great freedom and great freedom. You can become a saint and promote the essence of Buddhism. Vast and boundless, the chanting rumbled. Wisps of Buddha's light fell on Yi Xian. The sound of the gods and Buddhas in the heavens was coming. It gave Yi Xian a splitting headache, but he tried his best to endure it. What is Buddha? What is devil? Yi Xian's hair was in a mess as he roared at the sky. No matter how the Buddha's light obliterated his will, it could not shake his own Dharma and Tao. He asked the heavens but did not speak. He heard the earth trembling but did not panic. No one answered Yi Xian's question. Only the endless Buddha's light poured down on him. It was as if he was an anomaly in this world. Only by converting him into the Buddha's light could he return to the right path. If the heavens are unfair, I will pierce through them. If Buddhism surrenders to me, I will kill Buddhas and immortals. Yi Xian's will was indelible. He had gone through countless dangers to achieve his Dharma and Tao. He only believed in himself and not the heavens, not to mention the so-called profound meaning of Buddhism. Ugh! Suddenly, Yi Xian let out an extremely painful cry. Endless golden flames burst out of his body and instantly covered his entire body. These two old bald donkeys are so insidious. Yi Xian roared ferociously. His expression had become extremely twisted because he finally understood one thing. It turned out that although the spiritual qi he absorbed in the myriad Buddha spiritual pool healed his injuries and improved his cultivation, the spiritual qi nurtured the will of Buddhism. At this moment, it turned into the Golden Lotus Buddha's fire to convert him. The Golden Lotus Buddha's fire was one of the most terrifying flames in the world. It was also a technique unique to the two sages of the West. The golden lotus Buddha's fire was not used to kill people, but to convert people from their roots. What was conversion? Let's put it this way. There was an old saying that went, "It's easy to change mountains and rivers, but it's hard to change one's nature." A person's nature could not be changed. However, the golden lotus Buddha's fire could convert a person who was evil and evil into a person who was pure and kind. Chapter 790. This seemed like a kind of benevolent technique, but in fact, it was extremely vicious. A person's personality and thoughts were their own. If they changed into another person after being converted, would they still be themselves? After absorbing the spiritual energy of the myriad Buddha spirit pond for 8,000 years, although Yi Xian had been cautious and had abandoned all the Buddha nature in it and devoured the most essential power, the Buddha nature in it had quietly rooted itself in his body. Even Yi Xian couldn't detect it. At this moment, Yi Xian finally understood. When he came to Primordial Mountain, the two sages of the West had already taken action against him. When he walked out of the myriad Buddha spirit pond, the two sages of the West had finally bared their fangs. Ugh! The golden lotus Buddha fire was purifying his body and mind. Not only was it erasing the ferocious aura on his body, the Buddha fire was also entwining around his indestructible true spirit. It was like a maggot in his bones, gradually changing his will. Pain. It was a pain that went deep into his bones. Fear. He was terrified to the extreme. This was what Yi Xian felt at this moment. The pain coming from his body wasn't unbearable, but his will was gradually weakening. His indestructible true spirit was stagnant, and a Buddha nature was quietly growing in his heart. If this continued, he would be converted. Losing his true self and turning into a Buddha nature, from then on, Yi Xian would become even more serious. Although Yi Xian didn't die, he was undoubtedly dead. This was because the Buddha nature Yi Xian wasn't himself at all, and this was the goal of the two sages of the West. Tribulation Transcender Transformation. Suddenly, Yi Xian roared towards the sky. His gray hair turned blood red from the tip to the root, and his fierce eyes turned blood red. He hoped that he could rely on the Tribulation Transcender Transformation to resist this great tribulation. Buzz. Buzz. The word Buddha rotated, converting everything. Endless Buddha light submerged Yi Xian. Under the support of the endless Buddha light, the golden lotus Buddha fire burned even more terrifying. In the blink of an eye, the blood-red light and murderous aura around Yi Xian's body shattered, and the buffs brought by the Tribulation Transcender Transformation also disappeared without a trace. Damn it! Yi Xian was half kneeling on the ground. He roared ferociously and kept smashing his fists on the ground. However, the ferocious aura on his body was quickly being wiped out. What replaced it was a peaceful Buddhist light, and a swastika mark was faintly visible on his forehead. It was dangerous, extremely dangerous. If he continued to be converted like this, Yi Xian would definitely lose himself and completely transform into a Buddhist monk. From then on, he would no longer be himself. Heaven-destroying halberd. Yi Xian roared ferociously. His glabella glowed, and the heaven-destroying halberd rippled out. It was releasing an ancient ferocious aura as it slammed towards the swastika above his head. Clang! The symbol of the swastika rotated and was indestructible. Although the heaven-destroying halberd was known as the #1 killing weapon of all time, the symbol of the swastika was not a physical object. It was an indescribable thing that could not cause any harm to the halberd. Arg! Yi Xian groaned in pain. The golden lotus Buddha fire was getting more and more terrifying. The heaven-destroying halberd fell to the ground. Yi Xian had lost his final trump card. This caused his eyes to weaken and his consciousness to become even more blurred. Amitabha. Suddenly, a loud and clear Buddhist chant came out from Yi Xian's mouth. The Buddhist light around his body shone brightly. His originally weak eyes were emitting a golden light, and there was even a hint of compassion overflowing from them. No. No. Suddenly, Yi Xian's compassionate face was no longer there. It became twisted and ferocious once again. The Buddhist light in his eyes turned into a ferocious aura. It was obvious that Yi Xian's consciousness was constantly resisting the Buddhist nature produced by his body. The golden lotus Buddha fire was burning brightly. Yi Xian crawled on the ground and resisted it bitterly. His body sometimes emitted a ferocious aura, and sometimes emitted a golden Buddhist light. The two auras were constantly changing on his body. It was extremely strange to look at. Under the Bodhi tree, the two sages of the West were sitting cross-legged. However, their compassionate looks were long gone. The two of them stared at the black chessboard in front of them, as if they were watching Yi Xian's changes through the black and white chessboard. Yi Xian is really good. He can actually hold on to this extent, Xuanti said in a heavy voice. Don't worry, junior brother. The golden lotus Buddha fire purifies all things in the world. Yi Xian has absorbed the spiritual energy of innumerable Buddhas for 8,000 years. He definitely won't be able to hold on for long, Jane said with certainty. However, there was a solemn look in his eyes. It was obvious that he was also extremely serious at this moment and was not as calm as he appeared to be. Senior brother, although you and I have been planning for a long time, and it can be said that we can safely bring this child back to Yuan Mountain, this child is the protagonist of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Junior brother, I'm afraid, Xuanti said hesitantly. Junior brother, if you want Buddhism to prosper, this risk must be taken. As long as Yi Xian becomes a member of Buddhism, we will have 3 sages. When that time comes, we won't even need to fear the 3 pure ones, Jane said with narrowed eyes. Senior brother, are you really sure that he is the 7th saint of heaven's will? Xuanti asked solemnly. It must be him. There is no mistake about it. The great tribulation of heaven and earth has already begun. Yi Xian has stirred up chaos in the 3 realms for 100,000 years, but he has been safe and sound. There is no one like him in the 3 realms. If he is not the 7th saint of heaven's will, who else is worthy of this position? Moreover, junior brother, don't forget why Nuwa is determined to kill him. It is because she has karma with Yi Xian. Nuwa is afraid that Yi Xian will become a saint. She is even more afraid that Yi Xian will settle accounts with her in the future, Jane said with great certainty. Hearing Jane's words, Xuanti's expression changed. There was even a faint look of worry in his eyes. He said, Senior brother, if he is really the 7th saint of heaven's will, what we have done today is much greater than what we have done to Nuwa. If we can't convert him into a member of Buddhism, I'm afraid that if he escapes here and becomes a saint in the future, you and I will also. Xuanti's voice trembled slightly. There was even a look of fear in his eyes. This was because the 7th saint of heaven's will would determine the overall situation of the world in the future. If they were to bear the consequences, the 2 sages of the West would be extremely ruthless. Don't worry, junior brother. The golden lotus Buddha fire will not kill him, nor will it take his life. It will only obliterate his ferocity. As long as we can convert him into a member of Buddhism, he will be our junior brother from then on. With our help, we can quickly make him the 7th saint of heaven's will. What do we, Buddhists, have to fear in the 3 realms? Jane said solemnly. Boundless heaven and earth, all dharma shall perish. Suddenly, just as the 2 sages of the West were talking, a shrill and angry roar came from the black and white chessboard. The entire chessboard shook violently. With a loud bang, a scene that stunned the 2 sages of the West appeared. Crack! The black chessboard first cracked like a spider web, and then it exploded in front of the 2 sages. The light of Buddha that burst out sprinkled on Mount Yuan. Yi Xian's blood-soaked figure fell in front of the 2 sages with a loud bang. He actually destroyed his own cultivation. Is this kid crazy? After the two sages of the West recovered from their shock, they whispered in horror. They looked at Yi Xian with trembling eyes. "You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.